Welcome back, everyone, to the afternoon sessions here at the forum. Big Tech for the Planet is the first session of the afternoon. I'll just say a few words and then introduce our speaker. The advancement in exponential technologies has the potential to transform our understanding of the world around us, how we do business, how we interact with each other, and how we interact with the natural world. Working with leaders and partners from the big tech industry, this next session will explore where we are today and the potential for the future. We'll also gain a greater understanding, I hope, of the obstacles, of what it'll take to leave no one behind, and the incentives and policies we need to unleash the power of technology for a better world. We're going to hear from IBM, a founding partner of the Science Policy Business Forum. We're going to hear from Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, who are also delighted to welcome here to the forum. We're also going to explore during this segment how technology can help achieve better access and accounting of big data for the planet and why this matters. But first, to help us set the vision for this session, I'm pleased to welcome Tsepo Tsheko, the CEO of the Botswana business region, whose country is taking bold steps to transform towards a technology-focused and a knowledge-based economy. Tsepo, come on up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address the fourth high-level global session of the UN Science Policy Business Forum on the environment, to commence this session on big tech for the planet. I would like to outline to you today that, or as to why Africa is the future for big tech in sustainable development. It is indeed difficult, of course, to talk generally about Africa. It's such a diverse continent. So many people, so many different cultures, geographies, and climates. There are more than 1.4 billion people on the continent, and at least over 1,500 languages, different languages, across the 54 countries. But even with that, there's something we can say, just to explain or to highlight why Africa is the future. I'll start with the obvious, that a failure to achieve sustainable development in Africa will mean failure to achieve the same for the world. Africa is growing very, very fast. By 2050, when we do hope indeed that the world would have reached net zero emissions, it is estimated that around 1 in 4 of the world's population will be African. It will mean a huge demand for additional infrastructure and services, especially as Africa tends to be less developed than other regions at present. But because Africa is projected to be heavily adversely affected by climate change, this infrastructure and these services for a larger population with greater needs and demands will need to provide and will need to be provided sustainably. In terms of ecosystems, an immense amount of the world's biodiversity has its home on our continent. This meaning any global conservation targets conservation targets that must be met, they must be met in Africa to be met globally. Sadly, in many other regions, as in many other regions, biodiversity in Africa has been falling in recent years. So, Africa has a lot of problems to solve and a fertile breeding ground for entrepreneurs and innovation. That's the first point. There are other challenges, but let's talk a bit about opportunities. We know that the demand for certain resources will be key to the world mitigating climate change. And Africa is rich in natural resources, including many key metals for the energy transition. In that respect alone, it has already been described as an era-defining opportunity for the continent, one that will help provide prosperity even as African country economies become more knowledge-focused. So the second point is Africa has abundant natural resources that are also raw materials to the solutions of the future. As a young, growing continent, this means enormous human capital potential. There is talent and a thirst to learn and innovate. And this will only grow as we become more digitally connected and our capabilities expanded. Women will drive much of the growth on the continent. According to the International Labour Organization, workforce participation by women in sub-Saharan Africa has been declining since its peak in 2005, with an additional blow from the COVID pandemic. Women around the world have shown how adept they are at succeeding in economies, and fostering gender equality will be one of Africa's secret weapons. So, the youth dividend, being the youngest population in the world, and the gender agenda, being another opportunity for the continent. While the continent today suffers from a lack of services and infrastructure as compared to the rest of the developed world, there is an opportunity to provide from the outset sustainability in leapfrogging previous technologies and ways of doing things, thus putting Africa at the forefront. The average African's small ecological footprint can remain small even as we develop, demonstrating a world's first. The means we have to adapt climate threats will also be pioneering globally. We will also need to be highly innovative to conserve and recover biodiversity. And this creates the opportunity to design and implement solutions that could be taken across the continent to the rest of the world. So in this case, in this regard, Africa presents a living lab, low cost for experimentation. So it's a great place to test new ideas for sustainable development. With so much demand for new solutions, innovation and startups will be key, not only to Africa's challenges, but to the world's. There are initiatives throughout Africa to spur innovation, such as the Botswana Digital and Innovation Hub, of which I am CEO. And these will keep growing as our successes mount. Many of the solutions developed by our innovators on the continent will be facilitated through information technology. The possibilities are wide-ranging, from using tech to identify, measure, and track species, to helping verify the provenance of resource through the value chains. Also to improving education and upskilling of Africans, to creating smart cities and smart villages, and pioneering agricultural practices and sustainable products. Big tech will be a big part of meeting the challenge of the triple crises of climate change, biodiversity, and population growth across the globe. And this will necessitate collaborations with African innovators. Pioneers of solutions will tap into the platforms and expertise of big tech companies to refine and deploy local solutions that will sometimes become, not just sometimes, but will most likely become international and internationally relevant. Big tech, of course, is already opening offices, and the operations are coming onto the continent at scale. But I am sure this pace will accelerate in the not too distant future. So Africa is ready for collaborations both within the continent and across the continent, as well as partnerships with big tech on tech transfer, again, looking at the global network. As we're hearing at this forum, we as the world have the means and capabilities to address the triple crises: climate change, reduction in biodiversity, pollution, and population, including population growth. While we face challenging times, we also look upon exciting opportunities not only for Africa, but for the world. I am sure that Africa is set to make the headlines over the coming decades in its sustainable development. In being such a hive of activity, in becoming a world leader, it is my hope that we will help leapfrog many Africans who live in poverty into prosperity. I thank you.
Hi, just before you go, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. We're just about to hear from a number of big tech leaders, IBM, Google, Amazon. What do you want to hear from them? What is your message, your main message to them? I know you've said that you're ready to partner. What do you want to hear from these big tech leaders here today?
I would like to understand how, as big tech, they're not bringing technology as a first, but rather understanding the needs first of all, and allowing those that they're partnering with on the continent to take a lead and to be empowered to contribute with how technology solves the problems, but not how the problems adapt to the technologies that these big tech companies are bringing. So it has to be sustainable, and that's the only way it can be. So I would like to see where that interaction is happening, not where the technology is being sold to the continent.
Okay, yeah. Very good. Let's wait and see what they say. Thank you very much, indeed, Shepo. Right, it gives me pleasure now to invite Hendrik Hammann, Distinguished Researcher at IBM, and Christina Schim, IBM VP of AI Applications Strategy and Sustainability, to take the stage. I think I'm just handing it straight over to you, so take it away.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. How are you all? It's great to be here. We'll talk to you today about a few different areas. If we can click to the slide right after this. So Hendrik first will be speaking to you about where we are, so some technology foundations, but increasingly also some innovation and trends and where we want to be going, what we see in terms of technology, and how they can help accelerate sustainability and SDG goals that we've been speaking about so much today. I'll speak then about technology applications at work. So what are we currently doing with our technology to support sustainability goals, and what can we be doing even further to even more accelerate and augment the impact that we could be having all together in this room. And then lastly, we'll take some Q&A. We'll have Axel come back up and moderate if we have some time to have a conversation with you all. So Hendrik, take us away. So the first question we have for him is, Hendrik, many people think that the environment is anything really other than digital, right? So we talk about the environment as chemistry, as physics, as biology. Why are we talking about digital technologies for the environment, and what are some main technology trends that you can share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. The reason why we're talking about digital technologies for sustainability is fundamentally, in my opinion, only for one reason. And that reason is, so many, many decades, scientists, engineers, the industry at large have improved computation, networks, and data systems by orders of magnitudes at lower cost. And that has made information technology so successful that it is literally everywhere, or it will be very soon everywhere. Think about it. A single transistor, the cost of a single transistor, which is at the core of your computational devices, your laptops, your phone, has decreased in cost over the last 60 years 200 billion times, while the performance of that same device has increased 100,000 times. That's really what people refer to as Moore's law or Dennard scaling. And I think that's truly amazing. I would argue it's probably one of the largest, one of the most significant inventions of scientists and engineers in humankind. Now, we have made similar improvements in storage, in data storage, in networks, roughly 50% performance improvements every year at lower cost. That's why we can use technology. That's why technology is everywhere. That's why we can inform people. So it's a key piece. Now, what are we doing with all this technology? Well, we're collecting data, right? A lot of data, zettabytes of data, huge amounts. 90% of all data in the world was generated in the last 2 years. So you think about it. That sounds amazing. But in 2 years from now, what we know today is only 10%. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, the same technologies which we use to generate all this data, we use it also to convert all that data into information. Right? So continued innovations, so continued improvements in computation, storage systems, networks. We can build complex models. We can query data. We can build AI, artificial intelligence models, machine learning. We can create blockchain solutions, applications to reduce energy usage. So these are really the reasons why we're talking about digital technologies.
Thank you. So you talk about the advancement of technology and how quickly and how far we've come in the last few decades. What about the adoption of that technology? And can you speak a little bit about defining the impact of that adoption?
Yeah, so the first step in the adoption of digital technologies, of course, is the digitization itself. Right? It's a very important step. I think it's very important to understand that different sectors, different industries, digitize at different rates and are at a different stage in that process. And why is that? Well, it is because certain industries are easier to digitize. And why is that important? Well, it's important because the lagging sectors, or the trailing sectors, they can learn from the leading ones. Right, so think about media. Right, books, videos, music. That's a completely digitized industry. And you've seen what happened to that industry. That industry is very efficient. Think about the finance world, business transactions. Very digitized, very efficient today. We have digitized part of our social interactions. And so we're digitizing step by step, industry by industry. However, I would say arguably the most impactful sector is still yet to come, right? We're at a relatively early stage, and that's the environment. So we are in the full process of digitizing the environment. Now, what is this impact? Well, the impact is through all this data, we can become more efficient, right? We can use smart meters to optimize the use of renewable energy. We can use traffic applications to improve fuel efficiencies. We can use weather modeling to improve heating cost. So all kinds of efficiency applications. But I believe that's not quite as significant as what digitization really allows us to do. It allows us to create new business models. Right? We can get away from a consumption-based business model to an outcome-based business model. And I think that's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to decouple growth, I think, which we all want, from physical growth from the environmental impact.
What is the role of IoT then in accelerating sustainability specifically?
So IoT is really important for the environment because it's the largest source of data, right? So what's IoT? What's the Internet of Things? Well, it's the extension of the Internet of Computers to things like refrigerators, light bulbs, all kinds of devices in factories, machines, pumps, etc. And now these devices, through the Internet of Things, can gather information, can gather data, they can receive data, they can process data, they can store data. I think since 2007, we have more interconnected devices than people. We are doubling the numbers of interconnected devices every 3 to 5 years. We are generating massive amounts of data from the Internet of Things about the environment, and that enables the digitization.
So you've talked a bit about past trends in the technology space. What about looking forward? What are something that we can look forward to? What are some trends that you're seeing coming from the research side? You're all very, very focused on what's coming up, the innovation, and how we can apply some of that.
Yeah, so what's next is the question. We see 3 key trends in technology. So number 1 is nanotechnology will have a massive impact, is already having a massive impact. So IBM just announced a 2 nanometer chip. So what does 2 nanometer mean? That means the gate of the transistor, which is at the core of the computation, is 20 atoms long, just 20 atoms. On a chip, which is a centimeter square, we produce billions of these 20 angstrom, 20 atom long transistors for a few dollars, and maybe a dozen may not work. So nanotechnology is going to have a huge impact. Second, AI is maturing, clearly. So we have now much better AI models. We have models and techniques to combine traditional modeling approaches with deep neural networks that has shown huge advantages in terms of reasoning. We have AI accelerators, which will help us to reduce the energy consumption of computation and AI training. We have AI foundational models today, which allows us to train with less data, which makes everything more scalable. Now, finally, quantum computing is emerging. IBM announced last year a 127 qubit quantum computer. Later this year, we're going to have a 433 qubit quantum computer. And by 2025, we're going to have hopefully more than 4,000 qubits. Quantum computers are unique. They're very different than classical computers because they use quantum physics for information processing. And they have huge advantages. They can have huge advantages for really difficult problems, highly dimensional problems.
So you started touching on this, Hendrik, but please explain to us a little bit further about quantum, and in particular, its application to the environment so that we can all understand how we might be able to leverage this technology.
Yeah, so we have a movie here. Maybe we'll watch this first.
Working in partnership with IBM Quantum, ExxonMobil has been exploring how to model maritime inventory routing on quantum devices.
Mercedes-Benz has turned to IBM Quantum to explore how we can simulate the chemical reactions in batteries more accurately.
Almost 17,000 researchers and engineers come to CERN to investigate the universe. This type of research results in huge IT and computing challenges. This is why we have joined the IBM Quantum Network.
Quantum computers allow us to view incredibly difficult problems with a fresh set of eyes.
Today, IBM already has over 20 quantum computers running across the world, running over 1 billion executions a day on the IBM cloud. We've opened this technology up so everyone can sign up and experiment with it.
We need new ways to solve problems that we previously couldn't tackle.
By partnering with IBM Quantum, our aim is to ultimately level up our ability to tackle more complex optimizations and make bigger differences.
Quantum computing might not provide all the answers, but it may help us see the universe more clearly and ask better questions.
Yeah, so let me give you a few more details to quantum computers. So quantum computers are very different than ordinary computers. So in an ordinary computer, you have bits, right? You probably have heard about it. A bit can be a 1 and a 0, so it's realized by a charge. Now, in quantum computers, you have the concept of a qubit. That's a quantum mechanical device. And there could be the spin of an electron. Now, in a quantum mechanical device, the spin can be up, it can be down, but there's this notion of superposition, which means you can have a 1 and a 0, or an up or a down at the same time. So that is a key principle of a quantum computer. Now, there's a second key principle of a quantum computer, which is entanglement. You can have multiple qubits, and they can be entangled. So think about it, they're just connected. So what does it mean? So take 8 bits, classical computer. We know 8 bits, you can represent any number between 0 and 255. Very simple. I take 8 qubits, I can represent any number from 0 to 255 at the same time. So you wonder, what's the big deal? Well, if you calculate this, it's a simple high school calculation, you can actually, with a couple of thousands of qubits, represent more numbers than there are atoms in the universe. So that's pretty crazy. And now you probably understand how quantum computers can help. Because you can search highly dimensional spaces all at the same time. That's probably a way to think about it. So how is that important for climate and sustainability? So think about the optimization, or think about carbon capture. Molecules, processes to improve carbon capture. What do they depend on? They depend on understanding the chemistry. The chemistry is made out of atoms. There are trillions and trillions of different options how electrons can be surrounded by atoms. Quantum computers can help us to calculate binding energies of these species. And that's exactly where some of the promises of quantum computers are.
Amazing. So lastly, you've spoken a lot about different technology. You've shared with us a little bit about quantum. If you were to summarize how technology can be used and the opportunities of technology to accelerate some of the sustainability goals that we mentioned in a few sentences, how would you go about explaining that, in addition to the carbon example you just shared?
Yeah. So I think there are 2 key opportunities. Of course, on one hand, we have all this technology, we're building it out, we're improving it, and we must apply it as fast as possible. And I think if we do this right, at least we have a chance to grow without physical growth, right? We can grow virtually. That is a promise of digitization. We can make things more efficient, without more resources, without more materials, without more energy, and that's really how we can grow in the future. The second aspect, I think, is equally important. I think we all believe that while we must act now, there are tons of discoveries to be made to become more sustainable. There is need for discovery, for scientific discovery, finding new approaches. These technologies we talked about, right? Think about supercomputers, the bits, nanotechnology, neurons, AI accelerators, AI, quantum computers. We believe they can help tremendously with scientific discovery. Scientific discovery, accelerating the scientific discovery for climate and sustainability. In fact, in IBM Research, we are setting discovery accelerators up all around the globe, where we actually work with partners, with scientists, on accelerating the techniques to find these solutions for climate and sustainability.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're going to switch over now, and I'll speak a little bit about some of the applications that we've been using with some of the products we have, thank you, based off of some of the technology that Hendrik has been sharing with us. So I'll skip over here.
Okay, Christina, so I have some questions for you.
Yes.
So that was pretty theoretical I talked about, I'm afraid. So how about bringing this to action? How do we operationalize sustainability? And what technologies out of all the ones I talked about we are using for that?
Yeah, great question. I'm actually going to start with a short video as well.
Sustainability. It's not a trend. For businesses worldwide, it's a mandate to transform.
The magnitude of what we have to deliver is enormous. We no longer can live with the small solutions that we've been delivering over the last decades.
Across industries, business leaders are finding new ways to bring sustainability into the core of their operations.
We have worked on digitalizing our asset management to be able to develop predictive models that can help us actually put in our effort where it really matters.
I focus on giving companies the tools they need to decarbonize. The outcome that we're driving towards is going to be emissions transparency.
They're partnering with industry leaders to encourage innovation and accelerate their digital transformation.
When you want to approach these problems, you must be deliberate, you must pick your path. And our focus here at IBM is supporting our customers' very journey.
Don't try to find the perfect solution. Act your way into the future and don't wait.
Are you ready to create a more sustainable business?
All right, so what you've seen here are just a few real-life business applications. And I say business, but I use that term loosely, right? Because this is relevant across industries and across sectors in terms of how technology that Hendrik was describing can be used. This is not a trend. They said this in the beginning of the video. It's not a trend, and it's not philanthropy, right? This is core to the intelligent decision-making of every single day within the business or within the organization. It's really speaking to business imperatives or organizational imperatives. What are the strategic goals? And I've heard a few folks speak about that this morning, but what are the outcomes that you all are trying to achieve, or we collectively are trying to achieve, whether or not they're the SDGs or something else? And then how do we leverage technology to be able to accelerate and get us towards those goals? So one of the things that we have put together to be more tactical from the technology side for IBM is around operationalizing the concept of sustainability. We've heard, not just within this room, but for anybody who's involved in this space, we know that we might have XYZ as a goal. Maybe it's being carbon neutral or net zero by 2030. Maybe it's increasing biodiversity, whatever the goal is, but how do we start? What does that mean? How do we actually take some action to start moving in that direction? And I was actually very glad to hear that people earlier this morning, our panelists on stage, people are not shy now about saying, are we really where we need to be in order to achieve what we've said we would achieve in the next decade or several decades? We're talking about the survival of our planet. Now, how do we use technology to enable that? We're focused on technology innovation in areas that are really creating significant impact on sustainable operations. So if you look at this slide here, it starts at the top around the organizational strategy. If you're working for a particular government ministry or a particular company or any organization, and collectively, we have certain strategies and certain imperatives and goals that need to be articulated so that we know what we're working towards, right? It's not just using technology for the sake of technology, it's how do we enable it to achieve whatever goals have been articulated. We need a way to manage the data. This came up several times as well. There is no lack of data, and it's only increasing, right, in terms of magnitude, as Hendrik mentioned. What the big challenge is, and we actually just released a survey last month, I believe, where most CEOs, I think it was over 50% of CEOs said that their biggest obstacle in achieving their goals was because they could not extract insights from the data. data is all over the place. They're in spreadsheets, they're in different databases, they're all over. And so what do we do? How do we make sure that we're pulling that into, ideally, a single system of record that can allow for you to manage the data, draw insights from that data, and then act on that data. And so what you see are within these vertical pillars here are essentially the core of any, again, industry agnostic, sector agnostic, most of what operations happen and are needed within, within a business or within an organization. Everyone has facilities and assets, physical assets that they need to manage, right? Buildings, manufacturing facilities, et cetera. Everyone has IT infrastructure, whether or not you're using the cloud or you have data centers that you have on-premise, you have things that you need to manage. Everyone has to deal with supply chains. We're all struggling with understanding what some of these conflicts are and how they're adjusting to a post-pandemic life with supply chain issues. How do we make sure that supply chains are transparent and traceable? How do we make sure that we're decarbonizing them? How do we make sure that we're not using forced labor or child labor as part of it? And how does this all come together? And the idea is that you're able to have real-time data and process flows that are going from the core of your business back up to the single system of record, making sense of that, and then actioning that back down into the core of the business or your organization. And so that's where we're getting really tactical with our customers and with our partners to make sure that they are making sense of all the data that they have access to. So a few examples I'll share with you. The one on the left is the Great Belt Bridge and Tunnel in Denmark. So it's an 11-mile bridge and tunnel combination. It's with Belt, which is a company that operates some of the largest civil infrastructure in the world. And they use IBM-powered AI visual inspection with drones and IoT sensors so that it allows them to prolong the lifespan of aging bridges, tunnels, highways, et cetera. And this one in particular allowed them to prolong the life of this by 100 years and decreased their CO2 emissions by 750,000 tons over the lifespan of that project. So that's one example of how technology can be used in a practical way. The one on the right here is with the Nature Conservancy in India. They used AI to try to sort out deforested and polluted wetlands. So they were able to use geospatial data as well as our environmental intelligence suite, which uses weather data from the Weather Channel, and use that to be able to make sense of and try to action on some of the most polluted wetlands in India. So those are two examples there. One last example, and it's actually one that we worked on together with the UNEP, used AI to access data around marine litter removal. So the UNEP estimates that every year about 8 million tons of plastic makes its way into our oceans. That's the equivalent of one garbage truck dumped into the ocean every minute. It's a lot of plastic. So what we did working with UNEP was there was an elite kind of SWAT team, if you will, of data scientists and AI experts, and we worked to try to collect all the different data around those various sources and silos that I mentioned earlier, and pull them all together in one place to make sense of it. Not just that, we then were able to create a bot, right? And his name is Sam, and you'll hear Sam talk in a minute. But Sam was then able to make sense of all that data and, in human terms, explain what the data was without having to necessarily explain where it was all coming from in order to make it more human, right? And so let me show you a little bit about where...
Let's learn about marine litter together.
Show me a graphic on how plastics get into the ocean.
Here is a graphic that explains how plastics get into the ocean. Click on the link to see a full screen view.
Do you have any detailed information on the UN Environment Assembly resolutions on marine litter?
Detailed UNEA resolutions on marine litter and microplastics are contained in the document entitled Compilation of the United Nations Environment Assembly Resolutions on Marine Litter and Microplastics, found here. time, I want to help get the world emotionally involved and invested in working together in solving the issue of marine litter.
Why do you care about marine litter?
Why do I care about marine litter? That is a great question. I care because the people who created me, the men and women of UNEP, IBM, Soul Machines, and our member state partners, care about the oceans and our future. And solving the issue of marine litter is vital to the oceans and our planet. The real question is, do you care?
Thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation.
So the idea behind this really is, we have natural language processing. We have all the technology already at hand. How do we make sense of that and make sure that we're leveraging that towards future action? What this exercise in creating SAM was able to show us was that it's clear that technology can help to enable getting the baseline for data, which is where you need to start, right? Everybody, no matter what your goal is, you need that baseline for data. You need to understand where you are so that you can figure out where you need to go and how to get there. And what this project together with UNIP showed was we were able to do that. We had data, UNIP had data from all around. And so once we were able to collate that, get access to it, we were able to drive insights from it, make it accessible through this digital human assistant. It was a very clear example of how working with the very folks in this room and others we were able to create that baseline. Now the challenge is, where do we go from here, right? So it's one thing to have this prototype, proof of concept, I think somebody mentioned that earlier today, but we really need to make sure that we're pushing this towards real life, scalable solutions and action in order to make sure that we're achieving our goals.
So Christina, we talked about this earlier. We're falling behind the SDG goals and also the impact goals. So why is that? Maybe you can give your point of view.
Yeah, I think that we are falling behind for a couple reasons, frankly. So one is, as mentioned, not just with us, but previously as well, there's a lot of great talk, there's a lot of great collaboration, but we need more action. And from our perspective, that means get a handle on your data, right? So please get a sense for what the baseline is for data that you have to start with, understand the current state, get a handle on that, and then figure out what the right insights are. And I mentioned some of the challenges that some of our CEOs are facing. The second, and this is maybe not a popular sentiment in this room, but is I believe that we're being also too carbon tunnel visioned, right? So everything right now has been about carbon, not everything in this conversation, but I mean, there's a lot of conversation about net zero and carbon neutrality, and this is not to diminish the importance of that, but it is bigger than that, right? And the conversations this morning have shown that. We're talking about water pollution, we're talking about migrant workers, we're talking about so many things beyond just carbon neutrality and measuring carbon, and that I think the reason for that is because it is so much more easily quantifiable that people are gravitating towards it. But we have to get out of the carbon tunnel vision to really make a difference, and in order to really make sure that our technology accelerating goals that's beyond just carbon counting. I think those are two of the biggest challenges and why we're not moving as quickly as we need to be moving.
So what will we need to do to accelerate change, right? We're all talking about change, so what do we do concretely?
Yeah, so 3 things, right? 1 is get a handle on the data. I think I've said that multiple times now. 2 is, and this is a great forum for it, but it's really about collaborating. It's more than one company. What I showed in terms of the examples of the video these are how businesses are currently adopting technology for energy efficiency, for supply chain transparency, for all these different things that are very practical on a day-to-day basis. But it can't just be businesses that are applying this technology on a day-to-day basis for us to make the difference that's needed. We all need to make sure that we're coming together and applying technology, investing in technology, and collaborating together collectively across sectors and across industries through multilateral coordination and collaboration and investment to really make that difference. And then 3 is start now. I think there is some, I forgot who it was who mentioned it earlier, but there is a little bit of a doom and gloom. And I think it's really important that there is motivation and inspiration about what we do next rather than paralysis for action. So yes, we're not where we need to be or want to be, but we need to make sure that we start now and actually act towards where we need to be moving, rather than just continuing to talk and have no action. So, we're talking about Stockholm plus 50. I think the last 50 years, there's been a lot of great discussion and insights on where and how we're getting to where we need to get to. And I think the next 50, hopefully, we will have a lot more success because it will be operationalized, and technology that we have can help to accelerate that. So that's it. Axel, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. I won't pretend I understood every little bit of Hendrik's presentation. Has nothing to do with the way you explained it, by the way. Look, I do want to open it up for a short while to the floor, but let me kick it off. I mean, you quite rightly mentioned inspiration. It was a word that was mentioned several times this morning. And let's throw education in there as well. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit, or ask you a little bit about the role of technology in educating and inspiring the youth, for example, to get on the right track and do the right thing. How is IBM driving that, would you say?
So I'm happy to start. I mean, so there are multiple investments that IBM is making in increasing access to STEM, for example. There's also a lot of digital platforms out there that already exist that increase accessibility to education. And technology has been amazing. I mean, in the last generation, we've moved from people who were not able to go to school because they physically could not go to school, to everything moving remote because of COVID. I mean, that's not necessarily something that was great for everybody, but there are startups and there are different companies out there that are now allowing children to get entire curriculum through their phone, through WhatsApp, It's an incredible time for us to be part of, I think, that journey in accelerating education, access to education through the technology that we already have at hand. And some of these examples are amazing. Both nonprofits and IBM investments within the US and elsewhere around the world, as well as some of these other companies that are allowing for that. It's very powerful.
I would add, I think that's IBM, but the whole industry, having put this effort in to make it accessible to the extent we have, is a huge contribution to education, right? We see this education boom in many countries, right? Because they have access to technology, they have now access to the same MIT courses and everyone else, they can take online classes. I think that is very, very powerful. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think we can be hopeful, because that education is going to pay dividend, right? That investment.
Of course, the other part, and I promise I'll get to our audience in a second, is how the extent to which technology companies can influence behavior. Whether it's the technology, whether it's, we're going to hear from Google, whether it's a search engine, influencing consumer behavior, pushing products, etc. How wary do we need to be of that role of technology?
I think it's all related to education, right? If you can make the right choices, and I think it's all about the choices, right? Of course, in IBM, we believe big in open source science. So we're not in the business of search engines. So in general, I think in my mind, it all comes back down to education, educating people, what are your choices, and then they can make the right choices for them, whether they want to be exposed to certain products or not, right?
Okay, let's have some questions from you. Has anyone got some questions for IBM? Yeah, gentleman right there, and then we'll come to you, Steve. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Pascal Peluzzi from Europe. Excellent presentation, thank you. It's true that we've been living in an age where big data is really transforming everything. Now, I'm still worried about the e-waste issue, since you're talking that we are dematerializing information, but still we need data farms, we need servers, keyboards, screens, and computers being replaced in a very fast way. How do we deal with e-waste? Only 78 countries have regulations on e-waste, so how are we going to crunch that issue? Thank you.
Perhaps you can clarify. I didn't quite catch it. Was it on
EWaste?
EWaste. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got that right. Yeah. So we. No, it's a very good question. In general, I mostly talked about, of course, the opportunities of computing for sustainability, but that wouldn't make any sense if we wouldn't have sustainable computing. And so we drive in IBM fairly large programs on recycling, on energy efficiency of computation, on driving it down. The industry has done a tremendous job. Some of the benefits we've achieved, of course, have been eaten up by the increased demand in computing. But I think the whole area of sustainable computing has been and will be in the focus of everyone in the industry. Because obviously we all realize that e-waste and energy consumption of computing and so on and so forth needs to be controlled.
If I could add to that, it is a great question. Thank you for raising that. I think part of it is as well ensuring that the longevity of our technology is also something that we focus on, right? So it's not something, if we can decrease the amount of garbage and e-waste that's created to begin with through new technology, through energy efficiency, through just increasing the lifespan of our existing products, that will help as well as the concept around circular economy and the fact that now there are sustainability design requirements going into the products that we are purchasing, not just in technology, but elsewhere as well. That's also, I think, fueling some serious improvement in that area. It's still a significant concern for sure, but I do have hope that, you know, as we continue to evolve, that increasingly the engineering requirements will also support that down the line.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Steve. Right here. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much. Steve Kokoda, the International Copper Association. On the subject of AI, what is IBM doing just in terms of the ethics of that? I mean, are there fears about AI running rampant and then, you know, Skynet somewhere down the line?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a fair question. It's an important question. We have several programs on ethics in AI, right? And we're very careful about this. We are researching this very actively, right? How biases can be introduced in models, what's your sampling size, all aspects of the ethics of AI, of course, also how we use AI, right? How would this be applied? So it's an active area of research. We have actually fairly large program just focused on that, right? We are, in general, I believe, we are very, very responsible, I do believe, with AI. We typically don't, we obviously not in the data business per se, where we share data between different customers. We keep it separately. We are really upfront in everything we do with our customers. So we take this of course, very serious. Not only because it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also business imperative. This is why customers come to IBM.
I'll also mention that in the next panel, we have a colleague who will be able to speak extensively about this, and hopefully she'll be able to answer your question more thoroughly as well from her perspective. Thanks.
Okay, good. Anyone else, very quickly? Yep. Quick question here.
Brilliant, thank you. Tommy from Immersive. Quantum computing sounds incredibly exciting, and the question I have on that is access to this is, of course, important. And the partners you were showing there are, of course, big corporations, and the discussions we have today is about using data for good, probably on a non-for-profit basis. How are you working to share access to quantum computing for the non-for-profits?
Yeah, so that, again, a very good question. In fact, access to a quantum computer, everyone can get. We have free access to quantum computers. It's cloud-based access. Of course, we didn't discuss, but a quantum computer has to be at really, really low temperatures, so it's something you cannot have everywhere. But you can access to the cloud, you can run experiments. There's a large community we have built for people, for clients who are looking for commercial applications. There's a quantum network. There's also an academic network, so several universities, University of Tokyo. We started a very large discovery accelerator in Canada and in many other places. So we are, of course, have a huge interest in making that technology accessible. and also educating the workforce, right? We invested a lot of money into software developer kits, so anyone can actually play with a quantum computer. I recommend to go there and check it out. There's some tutorials, and you can run your own quantum experiments.
And it is linked in with a lot of the efforts that we have as well with the nonprofits that we work with, just making sure that they are aware and have access to that.
Hendrik, just to finish up with, what's the most exciting thing that you're working on? What excites you most about the work you do at IBM?
For me personally, the opportunities of big data in the environment. I feel, it's a very good question. Thanks for that question. I feel, which really excites me, is we have that opportunity to exploit this for something good. I got interested in this whole area because I realized that this massive data Pascal was talking about has never been really looked at. What an opportunity to look at it and learn something about the most complex system there is, right? Which is our world, our physical systems, weather, climate, the environment, biodiversity. And that's really exciting for me.
Good. You, Christina, you want to say something? Add something to that, maybe?
No, I mean, I'm all about the application of it. So
Yep.
I could not agree more. I mean, I think for me, kind of practical and day-to-day, how this actually fits in with what people see and interact with on a day-to-day basis is incredibly exciting. And to make this more real life for everybody rather than just kind of an ethereal goal, I think is very important for us to do something. So.
Good.
Yep.
Very, very, very exciting. If not a little bit scary, I've got to say.
True.
Look, it's a super presentation. Thank you so much to Hendrik and Christina. Thanks very much indeed. All right, I'm going to hand it over now to Shireen. In fact, Hendrik mentioned big data as something that excites him most. It's a perfect segue to this big data session now. Shireen is going to be moderating this one. Come on up, Shireen.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you, everyone. Well, Hendrik and Christina mentioned big data, so this is about big data. And please allow me to welcome my panel. Professor Paul Ekins, Director of the Institute for Sustainable Resources, University College London. You met him before. And he is also lead author of the flagship UN report called Measuring Progress, where we measure progress about the SDGs and how well we are doing. Next, Alexander Caldas, his Chief of Technology, Innovation and Big Data at the United Nations Environment Programme. Frédéric Bretard is Head of Projects at the Space Climate Observatory, France. Kaya Tail is Ambassador at Large for Climate and Energy Policy, Estonia, and one of the custodians of the Big Data for the Environment Initiative. Martin Brocklehurst is Chair of the Citizen Science Global Partnership. And Idan Dion, I'm asking on IBM once more to come here to talk to us about the ethics behind the work on data and technology. So I welcome my panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, big data is essential to our ability to make sense not only of the state of the world environment, but of human impact on our planet. We need all sorts of data for decision-making by government as well as business and society at large. But to make data accessible and usable, to turn data into knowledge, we require the latest digital technologies and beyond, which requires financing. Last March, during the UN Environment Assembly, we launched the Data for the Environment Alliance, DEAL, a member state-led global cooperation initiative initiated by the Prime Minister of the government of Estonia in its position as former president of the United Nations Environment Assembly and multiple other member states and partners to push this process forward. This session explores why big data is a big deal and how to expedite progress in this area. So let me start with Professor Ekins. How important is big data in attaining the SDGs? Professor.
Well, thank you, Shireen. I'm not a big data expert. I'm a consumer of data,
yes,
and I love indicators. And as you kindly said, I was a co-author of UNEP's Measuring Progress, and this was an effort halfway now, almost, into the decade and a half of the SDGs. This was an effort to look at the 93 environmental-related indicators of the SDGs and ask the question, how are we doing? And, I mean, I'm a bit confused after the last session, where we heard of the fantastic capabilities that there are technologically, because the answer to that question was, for 68% of the indicators, we don't know. So that's halfway into the 15 years of the SDGs, and for 68% of the environmental-related SDG indicators, which the world community had raised up as being the way we were going to see whether we were making progress, for 68%, there's no data. That is astonishing. I was utterly astonished. So I wasn't so astonished in some work of my own that I was doing in Vietnam and Kenya, where we're trying to define what Johan Rockström calls the safe operating space, define the safe operating space environmentally within which world societies will need to keep if we are to have a sustainable future, and for over half of our indicators of the safe operating space, no data. So I watch in bemusement sessions like the previous one, which shows that we've got all the tools we could possibly need to both generate and then process this data. I watch with even more bemusement when I see governments and billionaires blasting rockets off into space to collect data about the farthest reaches of the universe, but we still don't know how to answer the question about our own SDG environmental data. Are we insane or what? I mean, what's going on here? Because the investment that would be required to make those indicators operational is a tiny fraction of the kind of money that is spent on these sorts of adventures. And the other aspect we tried to do in measuring progress, and it's on the web if you want to look at it, was to connect those environmental indicators which are about policy, what governments said they would do in order to improve the environment, and those indicators that are about the state of the environment. So we would look at the indicator that said, how many marine protected areas do we have? And then we would look at the indicators that say, what is the quality of the world's oceans? I would have hoped that after 7 or 8 years, we would be able to find some connection between those two sets of indicators. Fat chance. No connection at all, again, not because of lack of methodologies to look for connections, but the data was simply not adequate. So there's the challenge, and if we don't get that sorted out, well, by the time 2030 comes, we won't know whether we've met the SDGs or not, because we still won't be measuring the right things.
So let me probe a little bit. When you say the data is not there, does that mean that quality data is not there, or the monitoring is not being done properly, or at the scale required, or is it a question of technology?
It's almost entirely a question of finance and capacity at the national level. The SDG indicators, there is a big database that is curated by UNEP, as I'm sure everyone is aware, and there are various curators of those indicators, and the curators need to be financed in order to collect those indicators on behalf of nation states. And obviously the SDGs are formed relevant to national governments, because it is national governments by and large who take environmental policies to improve the environment. And if you look at that, the environmental part of that database, there are still lots and lots and lots of gaps and lots of things that are not being measured adequately so that we can really draw any conclusions.
Now, the data that we collect, it comes from different sources, but how diverse is that? Like, for example, when we talk about performance, do we know, like, do we get sufficient information from governments? And does this information we get reflect performance by government, or does it also reflect performance, for example, by, say, industry, the private sector, and so on?
Well, there are, as I've said, basically two kinds of indicators. There are the indicators of policy, how governments are doing, and they're mainly related to governments rather than business. And then there are the indicators that actually look at the state of the environment. The extent of pollution, obviously carbon emissions, obviously other kinds of emissions, et cetera, et cetera. Ideally, you would want to be able to join up the indicators of policy with the ones on the state of the environment, because the whole purpose of the policy is to improve the environment. I mean, if it's not doing that job, then either they're not being implemented properly or they're the wrong policies. And we still are not in a position to be able to say very much about that. The nation states obviously have a hugely important role in collecting data, but data collection is not cheap, and many of the governments have other priorities, and therefore, unless there is external finance whereby they can generate the data at an adequate quality, well, we can see from the gaps in the data that it's not being generated.
Thank you very much. You obviously advise the UN Environment Assembly, the UN Environment, many ministers, many governments, all governments about these issues. So perhaps I'll move from this one and go to Alex Caldas to just follow up on this issue. In 2019, the United Nations Environment Assembly's ministerial declaration mandated a big data strategy for the environment by 2025. The Science Policy Business Forum played a role. The government of Estonia, as a leader of the assembly at that time, played a very big role. And here we've got it, we've got the decision, let's have a big data strategy. So let me ask you, Alex, what are the cornerstones of this big data strategy? And why do you believe it is a priority in terms of what it can deliver to support the implementation of environmental targets pretty much along the lines of what Professor Eakins has explained to us?
Good afternoon to everyone. Let me just express that, not overlooking what Professor Paul Elkin just said, the data gaps are a fundamental problem to tackle. And the whole world, at all different levels, particularly at the disaggregated level of a local and subnational level, needs to address data gaps in a very stringent way. But let me bring a vision, a positive vision, and a vision, an outlook of optimism. What Eric just explained and demonstrated, we have here, for the very first time, humanity has here a technology capability, possibility, an opportunity that was not here before. 50 years in the history of UNEP, there were not available big data, computation power, geospatial information. All these was not here to the level we have today, even 10 years ago. So first step first, we have to understand, realize our technology base has changed. These are times of change. But it is true. The answer, the solution is on people, on places, and planet. It's not on the technology. So we have to find a nice solution to harness the power of the technology to address people, place, and technology. Why I'm so happy? Because in 2019 ministerial declaration, while Estonia was president of there was a political leadership from under the 93 member states to put data at the center stage. We do have, for the very first time, again, because of the circumstances, a UN Secretary General that has put the data strategy at the center, left, and right of whole UN system. We do have in-house in UNEP, Hinga, who understands and leads with steers, data, digital technology. So we have a fundamental ingredient, which is political leadership, to make this happen. What is needed there is the focus on people. The technology and data technology is nothing without capacity. So the focus on capacity at level of subnational, national, regional level, all continents, and then global level. Capacity. people. We have two good examples. We're just starting a project with Lanzarote in Spain about technology leadership for youth, young girls in Lanzarote, Spain. We just requested by Balekis here in Turkey to do the same thing on leadership, on technology for young girls specifically. On the places, it's important to realize having information, indicators on extractives is relevant for Colombia, but it's not so relevant for Somalia, where the importance of data is on conflict, peace and security, is on water resources. So yes, we should not speak about data as it was a uniform catalyst for everyone the same way. It's different according to places. We have just conducted a common country analysis with the UN reform, contributing for the UN reform, in 60 pilot countries across 5 different regions. And we found out economic and social data need to be there together with environmental data to address the problems of the populations on the ground, the places. We just found out that all these different ways of arranging data are fundamentally different from Latin America and the Caribbean to Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. What can be a solution? And the UN system has a lot to do there. We should use the nexus approach. Data useful for UNICEF and for UNHCR on the ground on humanitarian purpose is also relevant for UNEP on the environment, is also relevant for DESA on economic and social indicators. We need to use the integrative approach of the nexus on peace, security, humanitarian, and development together to arrange our data to be useful on the places. Let me tackle planet. We've just done incredible work today with available technology. We can monitor disaster risk and fires at the level of province level, from Queensland in Australia to Coimbra in Portugal to the northeast of Brazil, to an unprecedented level of 24 hours near real-time data. We can do that. We are doing that. It's important to understand the level of technology available today is significantly, exponentially different from the past. We're able to understand yearly temperatures or the depletion of the ice in the Arctic poles. We're able to monitor that at the resolutions of meters at a daily time or a weekly time. We're able to do all these things. What is missing actually is one word that is part of the 3 Ps, so people, places, planet, which is partnerships. We need to have incentive structures on the ground to partner. For the business sector, to partner directly with the UN system, and the UN system itself to partner together to these nexus. So these partnerships need to go into action, into concrete actions on the ground to make this data happen. I'm very happy to say that given we're giving back to member states the mandate they have provided us in 2019 so clearly. And we have the trajectory of the data strategy to deliver in 2025 a concrete global environmental data strategy, and then to move on in this direction of addressing the needs of people, places, planet.
You talked about integration as integration at so many different levels as a very important part of that strategic thinking, of this vision. Some organizations, including in the UN, obviously, we talk about technology and then we talk about science and data and policy making, almost as if they are 2 separate things. What is your vision as kind of the lead on this global strategy? Which direction should it take? And then, in the context of that, how do we ensure that developing countries are not left behind?
Well, first and foremost, technology and capacity need to go hand in hand together. And even for decades now, since the very early origins of the UN, capacity building has been there, but this is actually something concrete that needs to be delivered for the whole world, for the global south in particular, but it needs to be there. But that's one fundamental ingredient that we need to change radically. We are using data looking into the past. We're using indicators to monitor progress of the past. We need to provide foresight. We need to provide early warning. We need to position ourselves. The next 50 years of UNEP on the whole will be completely different. They will be complex, uncertain, and they will be unstable. Those are three assured characteristics of the future. And we are not using data to establish these scenarios, to bring scenarios into the strategic planning, I don't know any organization that I've seen in the last decade that uses in its own strategy scenarios, scenario A, B, and C. We have not used scenarios to monitor the SDGs agenda. We have not used scenarios. Because if we're using scenarios, we're able to become more resilient, we're able to become more agile, and we're able to address. And
then why didn't we use these scenarios?
Well, the scenarios, why didn't we use?
Why did we not use them?
Well, the reality is the following. We didn't have the technological ability. We didn't have the capabilities to use those. We are very much now aware what happened with the pandemic make us realize that particularly WHO launched such a problem on foresight and scenarios to try to foresight in the coming short term, medium term, long term, how to use the data. This is what is called data for features. Features, because we're using scenarios to analyze different features. And I think there's a radical departure from the past. We have been using data to monitor and to progress and to analyze historically the past. We need to start to use it as emerging issues. Let me give you one fundamental example. We have monitored in a foresight issue about sand and the extraction of sand in the world. This was, if I'm not mistaken, 2014 and even before. And now sand became a reality. So we need to position ourselves to analyze data for future with different scenarios. The moment we start to do that, we are going to do a huge progress because we are establishing short, medium, and long-term scenarios on the use of data. I think that's a radical departure from the way of using data.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex. Now, you mentioned early warning and foresight. I will go now to Frédéric, the Space Climate Observatory, which is one of President Macron's projects under the One Planet initiative. When we talk about early warning and foresight, they are increasingly important to safeguard populations from global warming and all the natural disasters that are a byproduct of climate change. So I wanted to really ask about the Space Climate Observatory in terms of its role, in terms of the challenges it's facing, but more importantly, what kind of role would it play actually, not only in mitigation efforts, but adaptation efforts, especially in the developing world?
Thank you, Sherin. So actually, I'm working at the French National Space Center, and you're right, the Space for Climate Observatory has been launched by the French President Macron, but it's an international initiative, actually. The first step was at the One Planet Summit in 2017, and on June 2019, yes, there were already something like 25 international entities that gathered to create the Space for Climate Observatory. So what is it? Our guidelines are to work on the impact of climate change at a very local scale. I insist on this point because for the special sector, special space agencies, we are more looking globally because satellites are looking globally the Earth. We are also working with in situ data, so not only satellite data, but we are mixing in situ and satellite data. And actually the SCO is a kind of machinery that will give some labels with specific criteria. So everything is very well detailed on our charter and our website. If you have some time, you can go through. It's very well documented. So actually, the Space for Climate Observatory is a tremendous initiative. With this initiative, we try to mobilize the space agencies, of course, on the problematic of climate change. Space agencies, they generally build satellites. And they build satellites for Earth observation, but also to explore the universe, okay? But we wanted also to valorize Earth observation data. There are massive data coming from the satellites every day. It's thousands of terabytes coming back to Earth, and you're right, in the forthcoming years it will be much more. So we have to deal with all this data and extract the relevant information by hybridization with other kind of data. Actually, the SCO is also a cooperation framework, which is very important. It has been said before in the other session afterwards. where the space agencies, but also with very end users, like the decision makers, and of course the entire ecosystem. I will not learn you anything by telling you that all these space data are processed also by private companies that provide many services, from the cloud computing to the very end user applications. But within the scope projects, we managed to make them work together to build specific and very operational tools. Actually, there is already an ecosystem, a very rich ecosystem. Last week there was the Living Planet Symposium organized by the European Space Agencies, and it was crazy to see all these initiatives with so different applications for Earth observation, for climate change observation, etc. But actually there is a lack of global vision because there are so many actors, so many algorithms everywhere dealing with environmental things, pollution monitoring, climate monitoring, global scale, local scale, etc. So I think that the scope is here to federate these kinds of all these initiatives. So actually we want to make image new projects and to federate existing initiatives so that we could have a clear overview of what's going on in these sectors and of course for generating knowledge for adaptations of our societies.
Thank you very much, Frederic. And I think I see Alex nodding because one of the most important work that UNEP is doing actually is on trying to make sense of the ecosystem out there, and the federation concept is very much part of the World Environment Situation Room idea. So perhaps we'll deal with the Data for the Environment Alliance. Perhaps this is a very important role also for a member state-led alliance that is supported by the UN, where we have the technology actors hopefully coming on board to be part of this, where we can use the technology, use our knowledge, use our relationships to try and create better coherence. But is it that what I hear perhaps from you and maybe from Alex in the past, if both of you would care to just share very, very briefly a view on this, is it that we have too much work going on in this area? Is it almost too busy? And is that good or bad?
Should I answer?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. We have to be aware of the size and the complexity of the challenge. We're tackling humanitarian challenge. The environmental data access and transparent access is an humanitarian challenge. And the triple climate crisis and the way to tackle this is complex. So having alliances involved, just to give an example of the World Environment Situation Room, a data platform, we already collaborating, partnering with 33 different entities. We're partnering with at least 5 agents of the UN, with 2 geospatial agencies, NASA and ESA Copernicus. We're partnering with 5 private partners. We're partnering with the grid centers, the global resource information database centers spread all over the world, from Arendelle, Sioux Falls, China, Geneva. So we do have a partnership model in place. And if you ask me, is it enough? Is it sufficient? No. The big partnership, and I'm happy you mentioned DEAL, because it brings to the partnership the major stakeholder, member states and policymakers. So we need to benefit and to exploit this partnership model to leverage and to tackle the challenge. It's a humanitarian challenge. It requires this wide partnership approach to make it happen. And I'm sure the deal with the Alliance on member states to tackle environmental data is a fundamental contribution in this direction.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'll go now to Kaya Tile, Ambassador Tile. You're Ambassador at Large for Climate and Energy Policy in Estonia. The government of Estonia has played an incredible role in trying to bring the world together back in 2019. It drove the efforts toward the big data strategy decision. And now, just in March, it gave kind of the push for the launch of a deal at the United Nations Environment Assembly. What is the ambition in the next 3 years from your point of view as government?
Thank you so much, Shireen, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first go a little bit into the background of the deal initiative. We heard here already in this panel and also in the previous panel that big data is obviously fun, fascinating, fantastic. Now, those are not the words usually associated with the government. The government usually needs to be, or at least the citizens should demand the government to be, accessible and accountable. In one word, transparent. How do we achieve this? If policy making is data-based, and I mean, nobody in the world is completely there yet, but we are making the first steps. So to have such a policy making, what do we need? Create data. This is what we talked about. Be it big data or just data, and I will actually shock the audience and say that it doesn't even need to be digitized. It actually needs to be data, first of all. But of course, if you want to have a policy making which is less prone to frauds or corruption, then digitalization is certainly the way to go. So yes, we are advocating digitalized policy making. This is what this data strategy of UNEP is meant to be. It's meant to be a sort of a driving force for everybody to understand that quality data is actually an asset. And I don't know how far UNEP exactly is with this data strategy. I hope we are approaching it all together. But we thought that it could benefit from an instrument which we called DEAL, and this is Data for Environment Alliance, which is meant to be, for us, learning by doing, sharing good ideas. And many things in environmental policies have to do with huge business interests in different walks of life, be it forestry, land assessment, fisheries, energy consumption. All this is global. Everybody is interested in this. Estonia has been doing some interesting things, which actually even could be called fascinating on the government level as for artificial intelligence. And we do use artificial intelligence and automated decision-making in things like fisheries or forestry. And maybe there are countries out there in the world who would like to share their ideas with us. But there are lots of countries who certainly need to have correct, authentic, accessible data, basic data in things like forestry. And I repeat this forestry for the third time because we actually wanted to have a pilot project with Kenya exactly in this, because this is a field of life where many countries have huge interests. Huge revenues are coming in. At the same time, we all know what forests mean for the environment, the sinking effect of forests, the biodiversity effect, and so on. So very many businesses are actually interested in providing proof for the integrity of their business model. This you can achieve with digitized methods. This is the research component of this nexus. I'm coming to this nexus. So first of all, there is science, there is research, then there is business who is interested in this, and then policymaking comes in. Because everybody should actually ask if business is interested in, let's say, digitized methods of logging and felling, then why not the government? What's the obstacle? Are there political interests in play? Is this government actually accessible and accountable? Is it transparent? We should all demand this. So we are very eager to start our pilot project with Kenya. Thank you.
Ambassador, just a final question on this. In terms of the other member states coming into this, what do you ask them to do? What is your vision in terms of their contribution to this initiative, both developing countries and the donor countries?
Well, please come in with your questions and your ideas. That's one thing. Anybody who can come in with their money. This is also important. And this is what we have also already done. But I think the big idea is, yes, to provide a platform of exchange of ideas, but the platform actually doesn't need to be highly technological. It's more about human partnerships.
Thank you. Martin, you are the chair of the interim board of the Citizen Science Global Partnership. Citizen science offers great opportunities to fill knowledge gaps, and there is a question mark: is citizen science science, and how to make citizen science more reliable, and what potential does citizen science have, not only to fill information gaps, but actually to aid decision making?
Well, firstly, can I say that I'm deeply frustrated at how slow and resistant many governments, policymakers, businesses and commerce is to engage with the global citizen science community. With a few exceptions, and the UN Science Policy Business Forum is one of those, resistance to fully integrating citizen science into what I call the day job of policy making remains a major obstacle. And it's blindingly obvious today that governments are not delivering on commitments contained within the various multilateral agreements or delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. So the aspirations are in place, but the delivery and commitment are not. And it's this will to change, I think, that I want to see with business, commerce, global policymakers, to see them engage with the citizen science community and build citizen science into the proper delivery mechanisms for the multilateral agreements. Stop asking the citizen science community to prove that citizen science works. It does. We have enough examples to prove that. And we have examples operating at considerable scale now. So if you look at the three areas of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, all have citizen science programs operating at scale, at national level. What we now need are global bodies to engage and adopt the best practice and take it up to global level. We have millions of citizen scientists participating at national level, and we now can have up to 17% of the population engaged in citizen science for the right programs, set up in the right way, with the right data collection and verification systems. Let me give you just one example, and I could give you many, Shireen. 4.8 million people, 4.8 million, engaged with the citizen science app led by King's College London, the COVID-19 symptom tracker app. Up to 1 million people participated every day, rewriting the science around this disease, dispelling myths around the vaccines, and providing citizens with daily data at municipal level on where the disease was, the social breakdown, the age structure affected, and giving individuals valuable data to manage their own personal risk, including myself. So every day for 2.5 years, this data was produced and updated at 3 o'clock every afternoon. Dispelling, in the UK's case, unreliable data from the government. And it was benchmarked against the Office of National Statistics in the UK, proving that the data was reliable, but often providing an inconvenient truth. So this is just one example of best practice, in this case operated in the UK, but also shared with Sweden and the US and the USA.
I want to just follow up on that for a second, Martin, please. And I want to come to Alex for that, because it is a big debate about the gaps, the huge opportunity that citizen science offer. But my question here is really about the safeguards, because it's such a major operation. A question for you, and I need a very brief answer, and a question for Alex, and maybe Dr. Eakins or anyone from the panel who would like to address it. Citizen science is important. It's a very important issue, and it's growing. And I don't know to what extent you can control that. It's happening, and especially with the new technologies that are out there. Now, how do you create the safeguards, and how do you make it more reliable? What are the three things from your point of view?
It's about good design by scientists. It's about building in proper ethical systems into the way data is gathered. It's building in data verification systems. And it is a very wide field. So I've given you one example of a very big project, but you can obviously come down to very small projects as well. And the different scale of projects requires different systems to ensure that you validate the data effectively. So with very large systems, you can use AI systems, you can use algorithms to spot any data that is outside the norm. And one of the things that we've learned from some of the big data systems is that the data is always questioned when it is citizen science. But we have enough examples now on mosquito monitoring, on air quality monitoring, to be able to prove that the data that comes from citizen science is as good as conventional science, is cheaper than conventional science, can reach parts that conventional science cannot reach, and delivers at a speed that is not deliverable by any other method.
Thank you. My time is a little bit in the red, so we really have to go a bit faster. So very quickly, Alex, what could empower the use of citizen science within the UN system?
Well, it's definitely needed quality validation and verification.
Quality, validation,
verification.
verification.
Whatever we're talking about here, about tackling climate change, biodiversity pollution, is about quality data. So there should be no question about the validity, the verification of the data, the quality of the data, and what was just expressed by Ambassador Estonia is exactly that. Because only on that basis we can have transparency, accountability, we can have what is needed to get it well. So, and I'm a great supporter of citizen science. There's a way to go, but as Mark was explaining, if you design properly, if you triangulate different mechanisms together, you can get quality data. We're tackling a humanitarian challenge. We need quality data. Citizen science is one source of that data. In some areas, in situ data can only be collected by citizen science. It's clear. But quality, validation, triangulation of data, verification need to be there in place.
Thank you so much. I will go now to Idan and to the big debate about ethics when it comes to technology and big data, about transparency, about ownership. It's a big issue, and everyone is talking about it, from country data to personal data. And maybe it's a question also to our friends from the larger technology community who we will listen to very shortly. But from your point of view, Idan, what are the guidelines, what are the elements that we have to build within the big institutions, such as IBM, for example, to ensure that these values are in place?
Well, thank you, Shireen, for inviting me to be up here. Let me maybe begin to answer this question by how we see it at IBM. I mean, we are keenly aware that one of the most core values in any relationship is trust, whether it's with our own employees, our clients, or society at large. So for those who are not as familiar with IBM, IBM has been in business over 110 years. And so for more than a century, you know, I think we've worked to earn the trust of our clients by responsibly managing their most valuable data. It's their data, right? And we've worked hard to earn the trust of society by ushering very powerful technologies, as you heard from Hendrik a while ago, responsibly and with clear purpose. So we've, for decades, follow a set of core principles, grounded in commitment to trust and transparency. And those are the two key phrases that we use to guide ourselves in handling client data, as well as insights of the data, and also to be responsible in development and deployment of technologies that we brought to the, to the society. And specifically, and those technology, by the way, we mentioned AI a number of times, including AI systems. So specifically, in 2018, we've publicized our principles on trust and transparency. There are really three core elements. First is the purpose of AI is to augment human intelligence. It's not to take over. Second is data and insights belong to their creator. I said it before. Belongs to our clients, belongs to whoever who trusted us to handle their data on their behalf. And third, new technology, including AI systems, must be explainable and transparent. You can't just tell people, well, let me run this for you with giving you a black box. So we endeavor to follow these principles in our day-to-day operations. So take one example, IBM, we oppose and we will not condone use of any technology, including facial recognition, for mass surveillance, or for racial profiling, or anything that would violate basic human rights and freedom.
But can you implement that? Is that implementable?
Let me answer by how we do it. We just don't get into those businesses. We don't make money. So I think industry would have to work together. I can't speak on behalf of the industry, but as a company, that's where we draw the line. We don't do it. We just don't get those businesses. So I want to get a little bit. So one thing I like about working at IBM is, we have principles, but we work hard to implement those principles. So take these three principles. We actually develop a framework so that our developers, when they develop AI systems or codes, it's by design, what we call, the framework is called ethics by design. So we are known for providing services in the privacy and security space, and the AI ethics, or ethics in general, is actually the third leg of the component. It's built into the framework to any platform that within IBM and across our ecosystems of technology providers. So it's not an add-on. When you integrate ethics into privacy and security, it really forces you to have to look at that every time. And no one is perfect, including ourselves. So that's why we develop frameworks to force ourselves to say, this is how you do it, okay? Now, I want to just take a few more minutes, Shireen, if it's okay, to acknowledge that we also see the intersections between ethics and technology really go beyond trust and transparency, right? Someone earlier today mentioned COVID-19. COVID-19 really accelerated the digitalization of many sectors of the economy, right? But it also laid bare the inequity between the haves and have-nots. Right? I mean, for those like myself, we were lucky. My days were still structured for 2.5 years. I worked, I was able to earn a living. For the more privileged, the children were able to study. As difficult as it is, they were able to learn, right? But for many people, that wasn't a possibility. So it really lay bare to us. So in our view, the equity and the intersection includes, for those who have not been able to access, whether it's data or technology, or how do they even be able to develop. So in that regard, just last month, we've been speaking within IBM this concept of what we call responsible computing, which really has 6 dimensions, both social and technology. And just last month, we launched this responsible computing framework with Object Management Consortium. And specifically, the 6 dimensions are to ensure technology offers responsible impact, responsible data usage, responsible system, responsible code, responsible data center, and responsible infrastructure. So we are expanding these intersections to acknowledge that as a technology industry, you know, I think Hendrik mentioned very clearly, we have a lot to offer, but we also need to do it responsibly. So what we hope is to work with partners through the responsible computing to demonstrate our commitment to be responsible in this space, and perhaps even to restore the trust, if you will. You know, I want to acknowledge the debate to restore the trust of society in general toward the IT industry. I think IT industry has so much to offer. We just need to do it in a way that, as I say, is trust and transparent. And that's kind of, let me just close by saying just one last thing, saying that IBM's commitment to trust and transparency and the importance in maintaining our core principles that have guided us for over a century. What's important is that even, and in particular, in absence of government regulations. I don't think regulations at the end of the day will do everything, and it's incumbent upon us to be responsible, to be trust and transparent if we want to leverage the technology.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank my panel, but basically I think the conclusion is big data is a big deal. There's a lot to be done. The big data for the data for the Environment Alliance is a very important step in this direction, just launched in March, but with no doubt we are going to forge the next steps forward in the most inclusive way possible, trying to tackle some of the difficult issues, whether we're talking about availability and quality of data, aggregation, whether we are talking about the technologies that are required, the political will which needs to be led from inside perhaps the multilateral system, bringing people together, but very much also looking at elements such as citizen science and how it can fit into or how we can use that opportunity to the best of its potential, and technology. We need technology to do things better, to do things faster, and we hope that this would offer that partnership. Any comments from the floor or any questions at this stage? With that, I will thank my panel very much for your contribution.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Shireen. Digital Art for the Planet is our next segment. Acclaimed artist John Munro will present with us now, together with Tommy Lexon, who is the MD of the digital art market leader, Immersive International, a major new digital art installation, 50/50, created in partnership with the UN Science Policy Business Forum and art patron Jonathan Lett. We're going to unveil this artwork tomorrow here in Stockholm, tomorrow afternoon, as part of the UN Science Policy Business Forum's Tech and Innovation Digital Expo Transformers. We do want to give you, though, a quick taster of what this is about. It's going to feature an audio composition by sound artist Giovanni Augusta. John Munro created 50/50 using digital living virtual landscape and sculptured abstract forms as a canvas for data sets. I'm not going to tell you too much more about this. They're going to tell you themselves. It's my pleasure to introduce Tommy Lexon, who is MD of Immersive International, and Tommy will then introduce the other two guests who are going to be working on this with him. Tommy, over to you.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I think we will probably change the mood here a little bit. We are the arty folks. So just wanted to say I'm incredibly excited to be here. Having grown up just a couple of meters down the road, I feel so lucky to be able to introduce you all to this artwork. Earlier this year, we were tasked by the UN Science Policy and Business Forum to look at how we could do something for this significant moment in time and commemorate this event through immersive art, creativity, and technology. The result of that exploration is this new digital artwork we heard Axel talking about. It's titled 50/50, and it will be unveiled tomorrow at Kungsträdgården at 4 o'clock. This artwork has been created by our founder and acclaimed experiential artist, John Monroe. John founded Immersive 2004 and has since then created work for Olympic opening ceremonies, world expos, galleries, museums, as well as for private art commissions. It's a true pleasure for me to introduce John and his talk on the power of digital art for the planet.
Thanks, Tommy. So today, within the climate crisis, we discover there is another face to this unprecedented environmental emergency, and that is a crisis of imagination. Every morning, the newspapers, the news online, present us with a barrage of new terms and numbers. 1.5 degrees Celsius, NDCs, 36 billion metric tons of CO2 emissions, 216 million climate refugees. The end result, exhaustion, fatigue, and helplessness, a crisis of caring. For the creative industry, this is our challenge. How do we communicate the urgency of these times? Do we reimagine the world we wish for, or do we shut down our collective imaginations because of overwhelming fear and anxiety? We only have to turn towards a history of art itself for the answer. For the horrors of war photography in Vietnam, which inspired protests across the world, to books like Nelson Mandela's The Struggle is My Life, widely circulated despite being banned, or more recently, the groundbreaking creative actions from groups like Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, and Artists for Future. In all these cases, it's art that fueled activism and sparked radical changes. Now, as we enter an era of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and Web3, it's our duty to harness the potential of immersive technologies to shape the future of climate action. And this transition has already begun. A landmark project at Stanford has demonstrated that people reduce their paper consumption if they participate in a simulation of cutting a tree. At Immersive, we want to take a step further. Multisensory spatial environments are perfect for expanding the world around us, allowing us to forge emotional connections with topics that might otherwise be inaccessible. This is important because a key roadblock to climate action is that we don't know what we're up against, and more crucially, people just don't know what they're fighting for. And this is why our first major project back in the Museum of Ulster in 2006 focused on building a digital experience that brought natural history collection to life. And then in Dubai Expo in 2020, we told the story of the trajectory of human and digital mobility, presenting an alternative utopian vision of what future smart cities should look like if we move closer to nature. And our mission has been constant and consistent. Let's create spaces that allow people's imagination to soar. Connecting people through positive immersive experiences can challenge assumptions, foster debate, and motivate personal changes that affect the world. These spaces are not neutral. We're designing for the physical and the metaverse, which is intrinsically an innovative approach. It allows us to not only keep up with rapid changes in contemporary culture, but also shape the future. And this is why 50/50, which we're presenting today, is so important. 50/50 brings to life decades worth of data that illustrates the achievements and positive impact of the UN's environmental program in key biodiversity areas. It lives on and in these living virtual landscapes and sculptural abstracted forms. We want art, creativity, and the technologies that drive their evolution to be a clarion call for change. These forces will inspire people to connect to one another, to our world, and to its biodiversity. By discovering the beauty of this planet and experiencing the wonders that we're all working so hard to save, we can affirm that yes, change is possible. But we must first resolve to strengthen our shared humanity and revitalize our commitment to life on Earth. There's simply no other way forward. And it's on that positive note I'd like to introduce Jonathan Lett. He's the man who asked me to create an artwork in order to raise awareness of key biodiversity areas for the UN. Both myself, Giovanni, the musical composer, and Tommy Lexon, the producer, and all my studio at Immersive International want to thank him for his shared vision to create this positive message for all. So, over to you, Jonathan. Thanks.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's a real privilege and an honor to be here with all of you today. I'm going to just talk for about 2 minutes about why I'm here and why this is important for me and what we're trying to achieve. So having spent 15 years in banking and become increasingly disillusioned with that, I spent the last 5 years working with different companies trying to make a difference. One of those is Kuda, Africa's largest online bank, which now has over 4 million customers, making banking affordable and accessible, which is a major problem over there. Another one is Educoya. This is trying to solve the chronic, education problem shortages that we have in access to education in Africa. Another one based in London is Digital Futures, which aims to solve for both the chronic tech shortages that we have and also the lack of diversity that we have when it comes to employing the youth of today. About 8 weeks ago, and I'll take the opportunity to thank Shireen Zilber and team, my friends at Immersive came to me and said that they were looking for somebody to sponsor the unveiling of a piece of art which aims to motivate, inspire the youth of today and try to bring a more positive message as opposed to all the doom and gloom. And there is a lot of doom and gloom. We can't get away from it. But there is also an amazing amount of work that's been done over the last 50 years, in particular in the last 20 years. And I'm sure there's a lot of great work that's going to be done. And we've heard from a lot of companies today and people who are actively helping to bring that about. So, my story is I grew up in Seychelles. I grew up close to nature, hiking, surfing. And in fact, in Seychelles, there's the Aldabra Atoll, which some of you may have seen, the David Attenborough series, and the giant tortoises, which was going to be used as a nuclear testing site, but thanks to UNESCO is now a World Heritage Site. So there are these phenomenal, actions that have been taken to protect and preserve the key biodiversity areas, which are critical for sustaining life on Earth. So, I believe, I'm not an expert in sustainability, but I think it's of fundamental importance to all of us. And that's why I chose to support, this project and be the patron for this piece of art, which will be unveiled tomorrow by His Excellency. And I hope all of you will get a chance to see it. Look, as sponsored the creation and installation of the work, which we think is the world's first spatial NFT, which is an audiovisual 3D artwork that will be, as I said, unveiled tomorrow by His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly. And I've also agreed to donate the artwork so that it can be used. And how are we going to use it? Well, our objective is that the artwork will tour the world with the UN, potentially at future events and at other landmark venues. We're hoping that it will be used to inspire people and raise awareness about the positive and drive further positive progress. We've made a lot of progress. We want to inspire people to continue to make that progress, in particular the youth of today. And the language that they speak, is data art, is crypto art, is what you're going to see tomorrow, which is a phenomenal piece of artwork, both audio and visual. I think the other aim is to bring it to the forefront of both industry, policymakers, and the general public's attention. So we're hoping that this will continue to inspire in the years to come. What we're also doing is we're also going to create and auction 50 NFTs based off of the piece, which captures this unique moment of time around the Stockholm 50, and also, celebrating, as I said, what's been done before and also what will come ahead of us. And this is a living piece of art which will evolve over time. So that's what we're going to do. As I said, it landed on my desk 8 weeks ago. We've managed to kind of turn it into reality, as you will see tomorrow. And hopefully, if you attend the future events, you'll see it then. The proceeds of all of the auctions will, of course, go to the UNEP. So we're looking to raise as much money as possible with that regards. And obviously, we sincerely welcome your support if you have any ideas around specific places or events that this could be housed to help raise awareness, as well as the upcoming auctions. So with that, I encourage you all to visit the installation tomorrow. The weather's going to be a bit better than today, fingers crossed. So it should really shine. And, I hope that you enjoy this gift and the latest creation from Immersive International. Thank you.
Thank you very much to John, to Tommy, and to Jonathan. And yeah, it looks like it's going to be a really beautiful afternoon tomorrow afternoon. So do get ready for that. It comes together, I should have mentioned this at the top, with the Concert for Peace on the Planet in the same park. That's going to feature the double Grammy composer Ricky Kedge, and it's going to be presented by Ellie Goulding to mark that occasion as it rings in the Stockholm Plus 50 commemoration and World Environment Day. So that should be a very exciting afternoon, and we'll see you there. Right, excuse me, we're going to resume our big tech journey now. We're going to power through three extremely well-known companies and brands. We start with Anna Williams, Solutions Lead at Google Environmental Insights Explorer, who's going to talk to us about how innovation is powering change for a more sustainable planet. Anna, I think I'm just going to hand it straight over to you. The floor's yours.
Thank you. Hi, as Axel kindly mentioned, I'm Anna. I lead our solutions work at Google for a product called the Environmental Insights Explorer, and I am thrilled to be speaking with you today about sustainability at Google, as well as my area of work, which uses Google's geodata and insights to support cities on their climate action efforts. Next slide, please. Sustainability has always really been in Google's DNA. At the end of our first decade, in 2007, we were entirely carbon neutral in our operations, and by 2017, we were the first company of our size to match 100% of our annual electricity consumption with renewable energy purchases, and we continue to maintain that every year since. In 2020, we announced our third decade of climate action, and it was our most ambitious decade yet. With two very major goals. The first is to achieve net zero emissions across our operations and value chain by 2030. A key enabler in doing so is to operate on 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030, which requires us to evolve from matching energy consumption with renewables on an annual and global basis, and instead source round-the-clock clean energy at every data center and campus by the end of the decade. We are very much on our way to achieving that at around 65%, but there is always more work to be done there. Our sustainability work at Google extends far beyond our own operations, and therefore we structure our work around three pillars, which I thought would be helpful to frame before we dive into an example in one of these pillars. The first is leading at Google. It's our responsibility to operate our business as sustainably as possible, but it's also the best place to start in order to innovate, iterate, and identify and share best practices. The second pillar is supporting our partners. While minimizing emissions from our own operations is vital, our impact is far greater when we enable others to do the same. We're committed to sharing technology, methods, and funding to help organizations transition to resilient, carbon-free systems. And I'll speak more to our work with partners in a bit as it relates to supporting cities. Finally, enabling everyone. Google helps people around the world take steps to live more sustainably every day, and many of our products are already doing just that. For example, if you search for climate change, you'll find authoritative information from the UN, and if you use Google Maps, we'll help you find bike and scooter sharing options near you. We're making progress in this area, but we know there's much more we can do to help everyone live more sustainably. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of the ways in which we're supporting partners is helping cities address climate change by using the tools that we know best at Google, which is making information universally accessible and useful. In 2020, we committed to helping over 500 cities reduce 1 gigaton of carbon emissions annually by 2030 and beyond. Cities can be the most sustainable way for people to inhabit our planet if we address the fact that cities contribute 70% of the world's CO2 emissions, and many of them are unable to make progress on their climate commitments due to a lack of data and insights and technology. And this is why we created a product called the Environmental Insights Explorer, which is a bit of a mouthful, so from here on forth, I will refer to it as EIE. Next slide, please. EIE uses exclusive Google data lane and modeling capabilities in a freely available platform to help cities and regions measure emission sources, run analyses, and identify strategies for reducing emissions, creating a foundation for effective action. Data sets that once required on-site measurement and many months to compile can now be accessed virtually, reducing cost and time commitments that may have prevented cities from taking action. The insights that are provided by EIE come from Google's geographical data. When many of you probably think about Google Maps, you think about using it from getting from point A to point B or looking up information about a place you want to visit. But when you look at it more closely, powering Google Maps is powerful information and insights about the places around us, such as the size and location of buildings, overhead imagery, and aggregated transportation data. While this data is primarily used to help people discover the world in Google Maps, when we aggregate this data at a city scale, it provides useful information to take action towards a low-carbon future. Powered with this data, EIE helps cities address key stages across the climate action process to measure, plan, act, and track emissions year over year, which helps support cities across this multi-stage process, whether that be to establish a baseline understanding of their emissions, to help plan and implement climate interventions, and finally to track the progress of their programs. Using EIE, cities have the ability to estimate building emissions, to identify CO2 reduction opportunities using rooftop solar potential data, to measure annual transit activity by mode year over year. And additionally, within EIE, we're expanding our insights to include air quality data and tree canopy data through our EIE Lab section. EIE now has transportation emissions data for over 40,000 cities and regions globally. And it is incredibly inspiring to see how cities are using the data to make progress on their climate commitments. In Dublin, for example, Ireland's City Council used EIE to understand biking behavior across the city and implement smart transport policies to improve the cycling infrastructure. The program targets to increase bike trips by 20% by 2025, and they use EIE data to track the program policy and how it's performing year over year to understand the effectiveness of the policies that they've implemented. In Copenhagen, another example, the city is using EIE air quality data, which uses data from a Google Street View car that maps hyperlocal, block-by-block emissions and particle pollution to prioritize climate actions that have immediate impact on human health. As a global information company, our commitments to supporting cities also come with challenges that we are always seeking to improve upon. The first is scale. There's a general lack of globally consistent, locally relevant environmental data that can be used to track progress over time. This is the opportunity that Google and EIE can help fill by producing new underlying bottoms-up measurement of the world. But there are still many sectors and solutions that need to be built. The second challenge we face is trust. We found that it isn't always easy for stakeholders to adopt, understand, and implement new data sources. Because it's not just that the data needs to be created, it needs to be contextualized and surrounded by validation and support. And this is why we partner very closely with partners including C40 Cities, the Global Covenant of Mayors, ICLEI, and many others to help cities take action using our data. And finally, worth mentioning that data and information is not enough. We want people to take action, but data is only one piece of that puzzle, and in order to really solve climate change at the speed at which we need to, it requires, in addition to information, it requires us all to work together across policy, behavior change, and businesses to create and accelerate change. Thank you very much for your time, for the opportunity to speak to you about sustainability at Google and the Environmental Insights Explorer. If you'd like to learn more or explore data for your own city, you can visit insights.sustainability.google. Thank you.
Indeed, Anna. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. If you've got any questions, by the way, just put your hand up and we could come back to it in a sec. All right, Anna, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move straight on, if you don't mind, to gaming. Gaming, of course, has taken the world by storm. It's been transforming industries, digital and immersive art, our living rooms, our kids, our planet. It comes, of course, with a footprint and also with opportunities. Trista Patterson is Microsoft's Director of Gaming Sustainability. Trista, tell us a little bit more, please.
Thank you. Are we having fun yet? Not yet. Yes. Well, I have a message and a mission for you. My message is, you're working too hard. This is tough, dirty, awful business. We are stepping backward toward every single global goal that we have. The next generation has all of their hopes and dreams riding on us, and we're slipping. That's the message. You need a change generator. You need a source of energy that will feed you and give you positivity and lift you up when you think that hope is gone. And right now, I'm pushing myself to talk through emotion, because I recognize in every single one of you, my peers, the ones that inspire me and challenge me, you are in the most powerful positions in the world, and you don't have what you need to make the biggest difference that the world needs to create change. So therefore, my mission for you is to bring the power of play to every single person on the planet. I'm going to walk through, this is Donnell Meadows. Many of you are familiar with her, a systems analyst who died in her prime, about the same age as I am. But she also was a very powerful systems thinker, and many of her concepts have driven the way in which I approach systems architecture and have been able to drive change at levels larger than are normally accessible at my own. The reason why I know that you need help, and you need play, and you need joy, and you need things that can feed you, is because this is a photo of my father. For 17 years, he suffered with multiple sclerosis and was progressively losing physical faculty and mental capability year after year after year. I don't really have to explain to you the pain and difficulty of what that's like, because I know that as environment and sustainable development professionals, you live this reality every single day. You know the people that are dying because they don't have food on their tables. You know the girls that don't have access to education. You know the forests and the deforestation rates that are increasing, and the marine plastic that is like a tidal wave. And this is one of the most difficult realities to bear. And how can you keep going when every single year all of the experts, all of the planet's doctors are telling you it's hopeless, it's over, there's nothing more you can do? Because deep down you know that there are things that can be done and that it is possible for humanity to make a change. My father, when he was given 3 months left to live, we brought him to a more playful place where he witnessed the birth of his first grandchild and where he lived closer to family. And as a consequence, he got more playful medical care that was able to strengthen and feed him in such a way that he managed to live an additional 5 years. The device on the lower right-hand side is actually a gaming device that you can control by breath or even by tongue movement. It's very similar to one of the devices that he used, and in fact, one of the reasons why I was good and one of the only people that could drive his wheelchair is because the joystick on his first version of his wheelchair was similar to an Atari joystick, something that I'd grown up with as a child. Gaming also really attracted me because I read a book from my Stockholm relatives by a Swedish author named Harry Martinsson. And he wrote a book about Aniara, where the Earth's inhabitants had destroyed the planet's life support system, and as a consequence, They were fleeing for Mars as refugees. And at a certain moment, an asteroid knocked the ship off course, and they were banished to an endless voyage across space. Inside this spaceship, there was a computer, a MIMA, that would transmit visions of what their memories of planet Earth used to be, gave them visions. This fed them. It was a place of tremendous enjoyment where they could play and remember and share and cherish. And over time, however, there was a feedback loop. And humanity couldn't manage to keep its visions positive enough. They didn't have the discipline. And as a consequence, over time, they lost hope. The visions began to degrade. The MIMA began to play for them these damaging visions. And as a consequence, over time, MIMA eventually lost all hope. She died. And as a consequence, all of the ship's inhabitants died. Our generation, our time on this planet right now, has a very unique opportunity. We can transform our ability to control the positivity and strength of our vision. One thing I find really unique about gaming is that it also has this positive feedback loop. Unlike buying a refrigerator where you buy an appliance and you put it in your house and your link with the organization that you purchased that from is basically broken, a game console inside of your house can interact with you. You can interact with people. You can update. You can learn. You can create new games. You can explore new worlds. And so this is one opportunity. It's a tool that I think is a stone unturned in terms of creating a better future. In my former position, working for Grid Arendal, which is a support unit to UN Environment located in Norway, we created a group, an initiative about bringing gaming and empowering people to play for the planet. And this now is an organization that reaches 1.5 billion of the 3 billion total video gamers in the world. They're spread out all around the world. The darkest color there on the continent is that there's over 50% of the total population in gaming. And the number of gamers is astounding. And so you can see the colors there, the yellow, orange, and dark, about the income group. So it's not just the richest countries in the world that are gaming. Even Nigeria on the far right there in the little yellow bar is 30 million gamers. So imagine the possibilities for the kind of reach. Now, when we look at global entertainment revenue and we compare blue of music to red of films, over time we see that, well, it's interesting that films have some more cultural pull. But look what happens when we compare it to what's happening with the revenues of gaming. It's more than Hollywood, Bollywood, and global sports combined. Tremendous pull, tremendous influence, and not only that, but it has a main line connection to the youngest of our generation. This is the alliance that was initially forged at the Climate Action Summit at the UN General Assembly in 2019, where we invited, in this case, 19 of the largest video game companies to come together and form an alliance for the climate, crossing competitive boundaries in such a way that they began to collaborate, and we still do. Currently, there's 36 companies and representing 1.5 billion gamers. So now it's been my great privilege and joy. I'm like a kid in a candy store, because the diagram that I'd made a few years prior about all the different ways in which we can control the environmental impact of gaming on the planet in a physical form, then now it's my job to create and lead the teams that then address all of the different pieces of the life cycle for Microsoft for the gaming division. Microsoft has very aggressive climate goals, and it's a work in progress. Climate negative for carbon dioxide by 2030, including a 55% absolute emissions reduction. That's inclusive of growth. and removing all historical emissions by 2050. Water positive, zero waste, and ecosystems. Notably, there's the planetary computer there that I have a personal vision to connect with gaming and interactivity in such a way, kind of like the dream that we've always had for UNEP Live, but hyper-powered. Some of the tools that Microsoft has been using, these are systems-based tools. The internal carbon tax, so each business group pays an internal carbon tax to main Microsoft Finance, and it shows up on the profit and loss statement. And these numbers also have a direct connection to the executive bonuses. There are procurement codes of conduct as far as emissions reduction and partnerships, tooling, and infrastructure. And then finally, I think one of the strongest tools that Microsoft has at its access is that the culture within the company has very strong bias toward action. And so the number of people piling on the bandwagon for so many of these initiatives has been something that has fed me even when I look forward at some of the goals and think, how are we ever going to do this? And so many people are coming up with more and more creative answers. Our teams now, especially in the in-game code, in the in-game experience, are working on greening the code, mobilizing in-game communities, care and causes, innovating the next generation architecture, and also catalyzing emerging talent and innovation hubs. Notably, Africa is a very, very important location for energy conservation and management in code and architecture. That's because in a landscape where energy is very scarce, people think about it 24/7 and have grown up with it always in this way. And they design everything from the timing in which they work with their peers, they optimize the processes that they use in order to bring code from initial writing all the way to launch. And it's not just about the energy, but also the bandwidth. And so as a consequence, many of these individuals are extremely high talent members. And so when we embed innovation sites, such as the newly launched Innovation Hub in Nairobi for Microsoft, we also have the opportunity to galvanize and create jobs, and not just jobs that do things like create entertainment games, but also games that enable people to understand where higher market price might be paid for, say, an organic food product, or when new vaccines will be released, or games that allow people to participate in citizen science, to be able to verify on the ground when marine plastic is there. So getting to some of the physical ways in which we are creating solutions, increasingly there are different ways to integrate new materials into the devices. And what's interesting to me is that oftentimes we think of gaming as the big console, but actually the ones that have a faster refresh mode are things like the controllers and the mice. So the ocean plastic mouse was created out of fully recycled plastic that came out of the ocean. Now, we all know that that is a drop in the bucket. But what's really interesting is that by listening to the consumer base about how they felt about this new material, its texture, the look of it, the consumer response that we could register, as a consequence, all of this feedback becomes direct inputs to the next version of the product line for heavier investments that take longer time and that need more economic degrees of confidence in order to proceed. Xbox also has invested very heavily in something called gaming for everyone, meaning that it is sustainable, it is inclusive, it is accessible, and a safe experience. I mentioned earlier the quad stick, but the different controllers are something that is probably the #1 source of pride across the entire Xbox workforce, the fact that they feel that they are doing the world good. This is a video of the in-game insertions for the Green Game Jam.
Today, around 1 in 3 people around the world play video games. It's now the biggest entertainment medium, bar none. From young to old, people are united in play. But what if video games could also help us tackle the biggest environmental challenges of our time? Launched in 2019, the Playing for the Planet Alliance aims to harness the reach and creativity of the video gaming industry to engage and empower their communities around the world. Supported by the United Nations Environment Programme, the initiative has secured commitments from some of the most influential names in the gaming industry to reduce their carbon footprint and take environmental action. For the first time, the gaming industry has come together to explore how they can encourage players to protect nature and biodiversity through actions in the games themselves. Mobile games that reach 250 million people are now informing players and encouraging them to contribute to reforestation, hosting in-game events to protect wildlife, educating gamers about ecosystems and biodiversity, and showing how communities can come together to tackle local environmental problems. Mobile and console companies that are used to competing are now collaborating, sharing experiences, and learning from each other. By harnessing the power of video games, we can preserve nature and biodiversity and empower communities to act. We have no time to lose. Together we must play for the planet.
So yesterday I spent the day at Mojang Studios. They're the founders of Minecraft. For those of you who aren't familiar, Minecraft is kind of like Lego, but in a digital environment. And many people don't know that Minecraft for Earth Day released 16 different teaching modules specific for climate change. Some of them are adventures that I've listed here, but you can check it out on the website. Minecraft education is free to play and it is released. There are 700 different types of educational modules formatted for different audiences, and they are ways to explore different environments. And it leads to real-world problem solving. And one of the places that we need most of this inclusion across different generations as well as different nationalities and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds is in community problem solving. And so one of the places in which our team at Minecraft has been working is to inform the G40 for the Council of Mayors. And this is a video about one that is being launched tomorrow at the mayor's office here in Stockholm in honor of World Environment Day. And this is a solicitation of problem solving across all of the city's inhabitants for solutions that will help Stockholm become more sustainable.
Hello students of Stockholm. My name is Anna König Järlmyr and I'm the Mayor of Stockholm. And I'm so excited to invite you to participate in Net Zero Stockholm. It is a new citywide Minecraft build challenge where you will have the chance to create solutions to create a more sustainable Stockholm and help preserve our growing city for current and future generations. And to grow sustainably, Stockholm has a goal of reaching net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. This effort is critical in reducing our carbon footprint and combating climate change. And you will have the opportunity to come together to build your ideas on how we might redesign a part of our city with innovative solutions that lower our carbon footprint to create a more sustainable future.
The path to net zero is a vital step towards managing climate change by making big changes today to eventually replace all greenhouse gas emitting activities with clean ones. Net zero and lowering our carbon footprint is our best chance for a sustainable future. How might we reimagine our city with innovative solutions that lower our carbon footprint and create a more sustainable future? Your challenge is to use Minecraft Education Edition to create new and innovative solutions that will lower the carbon footprint for a part of the city of Stockholm. Visit the Stockholm Minecraft.
So there are so many resources for you if you're interested in this. We are putting in a lot of investment to be able to also empower studios around the world, regardless of their game content currently, to be able to insert more green nudges, more green content, and also empower new and more diverse audiences to create the kinds of games that the futures need. So again, The mission for all of us is to find the things that we need to empower us to do our best and most powerful work. For me, it's the power of play, and I hope you'll join me in bringing that to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trista. Look, I've got a couple of questions for you, and right after that, I am actually going to bring Anna from Google back on the stage, because I have a couple of questions for her as well. Just first up, is there anyone in the audience who has a question for Trista on the gaming? Yeah. Lady right here. If we... No, we got a mic that's coming right here.
Hi, thank you for that. That was great, with two boys that love Minecraft. That's great. You mentioned at the start the planetary computer. What is that?
The planetary computer is a design that Microsoft is managing planetary level information to consolidate it into a certain single place in order to make it accessible to the organizations that need it most. It's also linked to the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability that then deliver specific solutions to organizations that want to engage analytical look at their own data of internal processes. So it addresses the issue at two scales. One is at the planetary level, so there's things like ecological data, physical data, understanding of climate data, species presence and absence, and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah, gentleman right there.
Hi, thank you very much. You had on one of your slides, green the code. Could you please explain what that is? As a programmer, I'm very interested in knowing.
Sure. So greening code is an effort to reduce the energy consumption of devices according to how they are coded. So whether or not it is in our specific context, we address it within game code, and we can do things like reduce the visual resolution of a game so that it doesn't require so much power output when it is played. We can do things like optimize the timing of releases of information and updates for when renewable energy is more likely to be present, or based on our understanding of whether or not the presence or absence of renewable energy is there. We can help optimize the size and packets of information and the way in which they flow. It's as if, it's almost like if you've always had a messy room and you've always lived with kind of chaos all around you, then you don't really know that things could be more orderly and much more efficient. And so the Green Code Initiative, in partnership with the Green Code Foundation, is putting together a toolkit. And if within the game industry, there's also something called the Green Game Guide and a Green Game Summit that happens with Yuki and Playing for the Planet. That happens every fall. And so if you'd like to know more within the game context, happy to connect you with more resources after the talk. But more broadly, this is something that is certainly forming the cutting edge of the industry in terms of energy efficiency management.
Very quick final question from me, Trista. Playing for the Planet, how do you measure progress with that whole project?
So, well, there's a couple of different fronts. So there's different work groups that each have their own objectives. And so we can do things like measure in quantitative form activations and engagement. Gaming is a very advanced industry. You can imagine the engineering that's gone into monetizing a gaming consumer base, but now being able to understand from the feedbacks of the engagement of gamers whether they do things like take action, if they show up to a local event. So for example, Pokemon Go joined with local garbage cleanup initiatives for Earth Day. They do it every year. And they have the garbage cleanup events register with Pokemon Go. And then if they exceed their last year's participation by a certain percentage, then Niantic will release very rare Pokemon in the same geolocation where the garbage pickup happened. So it encourages people to get outdoors, run around, collect their Pokemons after the fact. But also you can do things like geoposition. Some people have worked with Minecraft the AR form, outdoors, walking around, and you can receive notices. Did you know that you have renewable energy available here? Did you know that there is an e-waste pickup in your area coming up in a month from now? Get ready. That kind of information also, there are possibilities for social delivery mechanisms for the environment as well.
Okay, very good. Trista, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, go on. Small question.
Yeah, what you showed for Stockholm, is it possible to replicate that in all cities? I come from India, Calcutta, actually.
That's a great question. So right now,
Thank you.
Right now, Moyang is working with the Council of Mayors, with the G40, in order to be able to create more toolkits that will be released at the city level. So that is the level of resolution they're currently working to empower decision and social assistance. But the example that is coming from Stockholm and all of the Minecraft toolkits that are in Minecraft education that I showed the links to, all of those modules are directly applicable to different globalized formats. And so it's very likely that there are already in India many activations. I don't have long history with that particular work group, and so I can't name them specifically, but reach out. I'm sure you'll be surprised. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Trista, thank you very much indeed. Look, Anna, come on back up very quickly. There are a couple of questions on your presentation that I want to put to you. First one is, what are the challenges that your company, that Google, faces in creating access to technology for all, especially in developing nations?
Yep. Wrote down some numbers here. We actually have a lot of data within Environmental Insights Explorer for developing countries. We actually just released our 2021 transportation data, and that includes data for over 4,000 cities and regions in South America, 6,000 in Africa, and 17,000 in Asia. We know there's more work to be done, especially for supporting and providing quality data, especially in developing countries, but we're always looking to do more. Some of the other challenges I touched upon, I think just the challenge of providing quality, accurate data at a global scale comes with numerous challenges, and then also translating that global data set into locally relevant solutions, which is why we partner with regional partners in order to do that translation. And then finally, as I mentioned, data is just not enough, so we're always looking for opportunities to collaborate with organizations, whether that's providing funding or support for cities tackling climate change.
And on that, and you know, we just heard about Microsoft's collaboration with cities in particular. How does Environmental Insights Explorer, that you talked about, how does EIE work with climate organizations and cities in terms of engagement?
Yep. It's a great question. Again, with data for 40,000 cities and regions, we have a number of different engagement models. I should emphasize, though, that EIE is a freely available self-serve platform. So any city or associated organization is able to sign up for EIE today to see their city's data. However, we do engage more closely with cities when it comes to pilot opportunities. I mentioned we're piloting tree canopy data. That is a great example. We just finished a 15-city pilot for tree canopy data where we worked incredibly closely with those cities. It gives us the opportunity to get immediate feedback on our product and then feed that back into the product for future users to improve the product. But we do work with numerous climate organizations. Again, they really help us with providing local context for cities. And we partner with them, whether it is incorporating our EIE data into their climate action tools and reporting platforms, whether that is partnering with them on climate action projects or informing their research efforts. One final note that I want to make in terms of partners is Google.org, which is Google's philanthropy, recently announced grant funding for ICLEI's Action Fund, $10 million, in fact, to support sustainable city development. That's $7 million in Europe and $3 million in the US, where cities can receive up to $1 million in funding in order to support projects within their cities around sustainable city development. So many ways in which we partner to scale EAE data.
Okay, very good. Anna, thank you so much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Anna Williams from Google. Oh, yes, we got a question now from the audience. I'm sorry. Okay, I knew this was going to happen. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yes, because I also had one for the data panel, but I mean, it's being Google, I think you can take the data question. So a new study, which actually was published in February 2022, yes, identified that the world is spending about $1.8 trillion in governmental subsidies that are actually harming the environment. So I understand that you are partnering with cities, I assume with governments, with mayors, but if governments are subsidizing the studies, will we ever know the true status quo? So how do you get the data? Are the governments ready to look at the reality? Are you aware of this study? Which if not, I can say.
You didn't hear that? No, I found it very difficult to hear that as well, but it was about the working with government. Sorry, the question is working with governments to get the data, is that right?
The question is about the $1.8 trillion a year but public money that is financing our own extinction, because they are governmental subsidies, an equivalent of 2% of global GDP, which is a study done in February 2022. Could you understand? So the question is, if you are working and partnering with governments, are we getting the truth from your studies?
Did you get that?
I'm not able to comment on that, and I guess I'm not sure I'm following the question in regards to the studies that are being referred to, but probably won't be able to comment on it regardless.
All right. Well, look, maybe the two of you can chat about this off the stage. I mean, it's
happy to chat
it's
with
a
you
sensitive
offline.
question, I think, for Anna. But look, I appreciate the question. Get together afterwards. I'm going to have to let you go because I've got to move the process on.
Thank you.
Apologies, we didn't actually get you an answer to that, but maybe we can. Thanks a lot, Anna. All right, look, I'm going to move straight on to our section with Amazon. Dr. Ana Pinheiro Privet is the global lead of Amazon's Sustainability Data Initiative. She joins us remotely. Sandra Carlson is head of public policy at Amazon Web Services, and Margaret O'Toole is worldwide sustainability tech leader, who will moderate this segment for us. So, Margaret, I'm going to hand the floor to you. I know that there is a youth representative who has a question for this session, and we will come to you, Sharif, as soon as we're done here. Come on up.
Hello. Thanks for joining us here. I'm going to take a seat next to Sandra in a minute, but I just want to start by setting the scene for a moment. My name is Margaret, as was just said, and I work for Amazon Web Services. So for those of you who are not familiar with kind of what we do, we're the cloud computing arm of Amazon. So unfortunately, we cannot tell you where your package is. We do not know, but we're happy to answer questions around the role of technology and the types of partnerships that we can build together to use the tools that are available. Obviously, at AWS, as a cloud company, we spend all day with technology. This is a big part of what we do in our day-to-day operations. It's pretty core to who we are. And we really believe that technology is going to be one of the major tools that helps us drive the right kinds of innovation to complete the sustainability transformation. So our discussion today will be focused on different elements of the cloud, because that's the area where we spend time. That's not to mean that this is the only tool that is necessary for innovation that's going to drive us forward, just that it's the tool that we're going to discuss today. A little bit about kind of Amazon or AWS and kind of the way that we're viewing our role within sustainability. So at AWS, we talk about sustainability through 3 different lenses. The first is sustainability of the cloud, and this is our responsibility, which is really focused on our commitments to be as environmentally responsible as possible. This is around things like the fact that Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge, which is to be net zero carbon by 2040. It's promises like our commitment to be 100% renewable energy by 2025, But it's really around essentially the decarbonization and the reduction of the environmental impact of the cloud. But we look at this a step further as well and take a look at what we call sustainability in the cloud. And actually, there was a question earlier around developers and their role within things, and that's exactly the lens we're looking at with sustainability in the cloud, which is really how do we build better? If we're going to build solutions, we need to build them with energy efficiency in mind, with scale in mind, with ethics in mind, and that's really sustainability in the cloud. And then lastly, which is where we'll spend a lot of time today, is talking about sustainability through the cloud, which is how do we use the cloud in order to drive the right kinds of innovation that are necessary in the sustainability transformation. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our colleagues a little bit more. So we have Anna and Sandra here today, and unfortunately my name doesn't rhyme, but hopefully the three of us can provide some interesting insights nonetheless. So Sandra, as we mentioned, is our head of public policy here in Sweden, and she'll be talking a lot more about the role of policymakers and kind of how that interacts with data in general. And then we also have Anna, who's joining us remotely. Thank you. And Anna is the head of a foundation called the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, and she's also part of our impact computing team as the head of environmental sustainability. So we'll hear from both of these two about their view on policy, data, and all of the different intersections therein. But I'd first like to come to you, Sandra, and I'll come and join you over there on the chairs. But could you explain a little bit about your role and what you think policymakers can do to accelerate progress in this area?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. So in my role, I follow policy and regulatory developments related to both sustainability and digitalization, amongst other topics. So my main focus is on Sweden, but I also kind of follow what happens at EU level, given the impact it has in all the member states of the European Union. But I want to start with considering corporate responsibility and how this can lead to impact. Margaret has already given you an overview of what we do at Amazon in this regard and the progress that we've made. So I won't repeat it, but I do want to focus a little bit around the climate pledge, which Amazon co-founded and where companies sign on to the pledge to commit to reach net zero carbon by 2040. Because I think this is an excellent example of how you can create broader impact through corporate responsibility. So the climate pledge is also a good example of one of our, let's say, guiding principles, what we call leadership principles. We have 16 of them, which makes up the Amazon culture, but the one I'm focusing on here is think big, because rather than just setting a goal for ourselves, for us to be net zero carbon by 2040, we decided to take an opportunity to work with global optimism to create something that other people, other companies rather, could also sign on to have an even greater impact. Because the more companies that are working towards this, the bigger the impact will be. And since the launch of this in September 2019, we've had over 300 companies joining and sign the climate pledge. If I also then shift my focus to what policymakers are doing, and many in the room will know this much better than I do, of course, but there's a lot of things happening around sustainability. And if we consider the EU as an example, the EU has set a goal to become the first climate neutral continent and proposed a policy package to make this happen, the Green Deal, which we fully support at AWS. We're also seeing a growing list of countries in the Asia-Pacific region make public net zero emissions targets, like Australia, India, Japan, and Vietnam, to mention only a few. But given the diversity of our audience here today, I would like to take a step back and not focus on specific legislation and targets, but rather think about the trends that we're seeing and how policymakers can help amplify these. So, like I mentioned when I started, I think a lot about digital transformation and sustainability in my role. These two are also becoming more and more interrelated, and we're often talking about the twin transition, which is the transition both to a digital business, for example, but also a sustainable one. But these can also happen at the same time. And in a recent study from Accenture, they found that companies leveraging the twin transition, we can call them twin transformers, when they're both doing a digital transformation and a sustainable one at the same time, they're 2.5 times more likely to be able to be the strongest businesses of tomorrow and outperform their peers than if they don't do this kind of joint transition. So twin transformers, these companies, they really foster an ecosystem-based business model that's driven by sustainability and enabled by technology, like cloud computing. So if you consider sustainability as a business opportunity as well as a response to societal challenge, this is something that policymakers should be working to promote. So how can policy drive this? Well, sustainability solutions are powered by data, and sometimes this data comes from the company themselves, but more often than not, you need external data either because the solution requires it or because it would improve the solution. So I would urge all policymakers to consider how they can make data more accessible, how it can be shared more easily, how the data can be interoperable, so that you really can get as much as possible out of the data. And as a next step, once you kind of have the data, I think it's also worthwhile considering how you can process the data in the most energy efficient way. And here, I of course see a lot of potential in cloud computing, because we have studies that considered if you compare the energy it would take to run a workload in a traditional IT environment, and if you move that to cloud computing instead, that you can save between 3.6 and 5 times the energy. So you could reduce the energy use by nearly 80% if we look at European data, for example. And this is because cloud computing, cloud providers like us, we have a much higher utilization rate of our servers, and we're also innovating a lot around the data center facilities themselves. But in addition to making the data more accessible, one thing that I believe will speed up the twin transition is more collaboration and partnership between public and private organizations. And I've heard this come up several times during the day from others as well. And here I also think that policymakers have a role to play, both to enable, but to support and promote public-private partnerships at a greater scale. Public organizations, they have a lot of data, and they can contribute with that to democratize the access to diverse data sets, which we believe will catalyze innovation and problem solving in the sustainability space. We have one example of how this can be done, the Amazon Sustainable Data Initiative, which I know that Anna will share more about.
Thanks, Sandra. I think this theme of public policy and public-private partnerships, a lot of alliteration, but a really important one that we've talked about a lot today. Anna, for a long time, I mean, still are, leading one of these public-private partnerships through ASDI. Do you maybe want to share a little bit about what that's been like and what's important and how you see this intersecting with driving innovation?
Yes, of course. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Perfect. Well, first, thank you to Shireen and the organizers in general for the opportunity to have us here as part of this conversation. And yeah, as Margaret mentioned, I'm on the EWaste side of the house, and I'm the global lead for this program, Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, which is, we call it a tech for good. So think of it as partly the philanthropic side of what we're trying to do with some of these activities related to cloud and data. And so let me frame a little bit why ASDI and what we're doing. So we heard extensively, and I haven't been able to join you there in person, but we have heard extensively about the value of data, right? And how much data is required, not only to understand the baseline where we are in all these environmental issues and sustainability and climate-related issues, but how do we measure progress towards our goals? And what we see is that a lot of this data that is relevant to address some of these issues are really growing in size exponentially. We have more data than ever before. They are spread all over the world. They are available in different formats with different structure, and traditional stuck in their silos, right? So this is the way it's been working forever. And what we're looking at, if we step back from this process and look across that landscape, there's a lot of redundant effort being done in terms of the data before people can extract knowledge and make decisions, right, or inform policy. And so that's where we see a huge opportunity for the cloud to play a role in this process. And so what we're doing with ASDI is focusing on solving the data problem of the sustainability transformation. We've been working at this for several years. We announced this particular program publicly in 2018. And basically what we do is we engage with the broader community to understand what are those foundational data sets. A lot of them are huge. You know, if we think about climate, we have data sets that are terabytes and petabytes in scale, which is, you know, really big if you are not familiar with those terms. What we're doing is we actually create partnerships and collaborations with the data providers. So the groups around the world that are producing those data sets, traditionally we work with what we call authoritative data providers. So groups like NASA, NOAA, UK Met Office, and other groups that their mission is to actually generate data and make it available to the public, but that traditionally have not been able to disseminate their data in an effective way and make it available to everybody. So the cloud allows you to do that in a more effective way. So we partner and basically offer to host their data in the cloud. They maintain all the control and ownership of the data. So they own the data in the cloud, and we cover all the costs for storing and egressing the data if somebody wants to take it out, but they have to commit to make it publicly available to everybody. So what we've seen through these collaborations is that everybody basically wins, right, in this process. On one side, these agencies or these organizations get a better opportunity to disseminate their data, make it more available to the users, actually have it next to compute so that people can analyze it. So it's really beneficial for them. For the users, it really helps them more easily access and analyze data that otherwise they might not be able to either find it in those servers that are stored somewhere in some obscure place that you might not know, but also have to secure the storage and the compute next to the data to actually be able to use it. And for ASDI, this is a great opportunity for us to build a curated catalog of foundational data, but also very importantly to preserve the integrity of the data, because Amazon and ASDI, we never touch the data along the value chain. The data is always in the hands of the data provider or a broker. That means that the integrity of the data and the trust is preserved. So hopefully that's something that we can bring to the community. We have many other types of collaborations we are engaging with also on the compute and cloud grants. So we offer a set of cloud grants. We have an open call. Anybody can apply to actually basically use the data in the cloud and offset the cost of that experimentation. Examples of types of collaborations in that area, I would give, for example, GEO, the group on Earth observations. We have a collaboration with them to work with, in this case, 21 different projects from 17 developing countries, where we bring compute and access to data and technology and technical support for those countries to build solutions in areas related to sustainability and climate change. And another example I would give that we're very excited about it and continue to work very actively with is Digital Earth Africa. And for those that are not familiar with this program, this is basically an effort to bring Earth observations and information to the entire African continent. ASDI is committed to hosting petabytes of data in our African region, and they have built basically a tool on top of it that is enabling communities and businesses and governments to access information that allows them to better monitor and manage their natural resources and the impacts of climate change. And I will stop here, so we have more opportunities.
Sorry, I actually have a follow-up question for you, Anna. So you've talked about how this data is democratizing kind of the process of access, but what do you think is the role of tech in democratizing data and information?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question and something that we actually focus on very strongly for ASDI. One of our primary roles as we build these catalogs of data is really focus on the democratization. And that's been a lesson for us to understand what that fully means, because initially we thought, oh, democratizing data is finding it, opening and making it available. And as we engage more with community and different types of users that are in different parts of their experience of working in the cloud and working with tools like AI and ML, we realized that we actually have to go much further than just opening the data. We need to make the data as analysis ready as possible. We need to put tooling on top of it. So it's definitely a huge process there. But just if we step back and look at the entire landscape of data right now, the reality is that we are not all equally having access to this data, right? And I'll give you an example, for instance, in the space of climate change, where data sets are gigantic. They're extremely large, and the generation of those data sets is also limited to a certain amount of organizations around the world that have the high performance computers and the ability to store and analyze this data set. So this is not an equal level field, and this is not a space where we are all not only accessing information, but contributing to the solution in the same way, right? So the opportunity here is, let's open all the data sets, put them in the cloud, making them easily available and accessible to anybody, provide cloud grants to enable people to actually work in the cloud, and then build capacity, which is huge. It's a big part of this equation. So there's a few things that we are doing in this area that go beyond the data, because if we really want to make progress here, we need to go beyond just open data. There's a lot of talk these days about open science, open policy, and that means building more transparency and more reproducibility and more availability for people to actually go and replicate results, build on top of it, customize them to their own needs. And the value that the cloud brings in that context is that it's virtually accessible from anywhere. There's the issue of access to internet, but that's something we definitely need to solve. But in a hypothetical place where everybody has internet, this is a space for collaboration and access to make it much easier for people to actually build on each other's results and knowledge and keep growing this space. So we truly believe that this is an opportunity for democratization at many levels and build equality in the space.
Yeah, I can definitely see that through this example. But I think when we talk about data, and you mentioned it as well, Anna, it's not just about having the data, it's also about figuring out the different ways that these pieces fit together and how to make that into something that will make sense. And one issue where we hear a lot of challenges from customers is about managing different data across their supplier value chain. Now, how are they supposed to manage these different components in order to derive a logical conclusion when the person asking the question is 10 steps away from the origin? So Sandra, maybe you have a bit to share about customers and what they're doing in order to address this kind of ambiguity and the role of data in value and supply chains.
Yeah, and this is a question that comes up a lot with many of our customers. And if I start to just, again, look at what we're doing at AWS to address this, to help our customers, we've announced a carbon footprint tool that will help customers understand the carbon footprint of their workloads running on our cloud. So this tool would automatically calculate for the customer based on their entire portfolio. It will let them see the trends and history of the emissions over time, and also then forecast future emissions based, well, depending then on how their usage will change over time and how the impact of us meeting our goal to run 100% on renewable energy, how that impacts their emissions. So this is just one way how we help our customers understand the part of the value chain where we're a part of. But what I think is interesting as well is to share how one of our customers are tracking carbon emissions through the value chain, from farmer to end purchaser of agricultural goods. So the customer is a global enterprise with core competences in life sciences, and they came to us to discuss how they could track emissions through the value chain, like I mentioned. So from farm to processor, and then from the processor to the final purchaser. So companies purchasing crops from downstream processing, they have limited visibility into the carbon footprint of their supply chain, so the Scope 3 emissions. And with support from our digital innovation program, they worked backwards to define a tool to trace the carbon intensity of agricultural products moving through the supply chain, unifying the carbon data from seed to processing. So this solution helps companies make informed purchasing and sustainability investment decisions, offer differentiated products at the point of sale, and it also aids regulatory and climate target reporting. And this is just one example of how customers are working with cloud computing to kind of tackle transparency in the supply chain.
Great, thanks. I mean, I think there's a lot of different technology, and we obviously don't have time to touch on it today, but just to give a bit of color about the kinds of types of customers we're working with, and we have a few extra minutes, I'd also like to share that it's not just about aggregating data that exists that we've been able to collect and host in maybe ASDI or in other places, but also the role that we can play in terms of collecting data in its actual entity. So IoT, Internet of Things, is also going to be, I think, a key lever in terms of how we interact with data, how we assess data, and how we better understand the natural world in order to drive changes in the right direction, and how we can start to make more data-driven decisions in the real world. We have just a couple minutes left. Anna, Sandra, I'm sure you have some final thoughts to share. Anna, maybe we can start with you. Any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share with the group?
Yes, so I guess it was mentioned before that Amazon has just 16 leadership principles, and one that I always like to think about and focus on is one that we added publicly recently called Success and Scale Brings Broad Responsibility. And I feel like we take that very seriously, in particular in the program that I'm running, and I feel like it's really an opportunity for us to explore how Amazon scale and our technology and the infrastructure that we've built can play an enablement role in this space, right? So we're very eager to engage with this community in general to understand where technology can play a role and how we can be a service. So thank you for the opportunity to join today.
Sandra, any final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I would just reiterate the opportunity that lies in this twin transition, so the digital and sustainable transition, and just encourage policymakers to think about digitalization and sustainability as mutually supportive and find ways to support them and really, yeah, create greater impact through that.
Great. Thank you both so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Look, I know there is one of the youth representatives out here, Sharif El Rafai, who wanted to make an intervention. Are you there, Sharif? No? Okay. Is there anyone here who has a quick question for our Amazon panel? No? Sandra, a very quick question from me. How easy, I mean, it's a very broad question, but you talked about working with policymakers on the public-private partnership. How easy do you find it working with policymakers?
Well, I mean, I can give an example from something I'm working on here in Sweden, which is very local, which is a wetland project. So I think it just depends. I would say, to answer your question just shortly, it depends on how willing you are to have a dialogue. And to relate back to this project that we have here in Sweden, just 2 hours outside of Stockholm, the municipality that we're working with, they had an issue with a big risk of there being flooding in the city. We had the same, let's say, concern for where we build our data centers. So they came to us with a project that they were going to work to, increase the water infrastructure to handle the day water, but then also build a wetland to clean the water. And the fact that we have kind of an open dialogue meant that they could come to us with this project and we could then join and sponsor. So I think
definitely
it depends on...
Definitely a desire to collaborate here.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. All right, I think we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. That was great. Margaret O'Toole, Sandra Carlson, Anna Pinheiro Privet from Amazon.